Fungi and slime molds raced to decompose dead matter on the forest floor. Many spread by releasing spores, up to 30,000 a second. If just one of these spores lands in the right place and takes root, it can colonize a whole new area. But not all fungi feed on the dead. Days ago, a spore landed on this ant. Now she's acting strange. A network of roots has infiltrated her muscles. Her body has been taken over by cordyceps, a parasitic fungus. It floods her brain with chemicals, drugging her, compelling her to head where conditions are perfect. Just the right amount of light, just the right amount of humidity for the parasite growing inside. It forces her to clamp down in a death bite, and cordyceps reveals its gruesome nature. After 3 weeks of growth, cordyceps can release its own spores, infecting more ants, releasing more spores, infecting more ants, releasing more spores, infecting more ants, infecting more ants, more ants, more ants, more ants.
It's the Infinite Fringe right here on TFR, live on hackerhameen.podbeam.com and the infinitefringe.podbeam.com. My name is Billy Ray Valentine. Welcome everyone listening today. Very interesting stuff we got going on today for you. Break out your pads and pens and open your mind just a little bit. We're gonna implant some ideas and lead you down particular avenues. Don Jeffries is here with me. He's gonna co-host with me today. Don, how you doing? Everybody knows who you are here at the Infinite Fringe realm, but go ahead and introduce yourself yet again.
Hey, thanks, Billy Ray. I appreciate always a joy to be with you.
We're gonna have fun today. This is gonna be really, really interesting. I've been trying to book this guest for a bit, and I'm glad we finally got to do this because a lot of people don't want to talk about this sort of stuff, and I am very interested myself. John Brisson is also here with me. John, say what's up, man.
How's everybody out there in the Infinite Fringe? Great to be here with everyone. We're going to drop some hard truths tonight that many people do not want to believe because they're stuck in the right-left paradigm in the false truth movement.
Well, we're going to try to shatter that as we do all the time, but different take here this week on the Fringe. Neil Sanders is here with me. Now, Neil does a lot of really good work. I want everybody to go check it out. NeilSandersMindControl.com. And you can check out all of his work. He has a blog. He has even some of the stuff he's put on podcast for you, so you can go check it out. Your thoughts aren't your own. It's crazy. Neil Sanders, say hello to the Infinite Fringe. Welcome, sir.
Hello, Infinite Fringe. Thank you very much for having me on.
Thank you very much for coming on, sir. Tell the people a little bit about yourself and what it is you do before we get cracking.
Okay, I suppose I'm sort of a researcher, really. I got into this really because I studied psychology at university, and a lot of basically in psychology, a lot of it bleeds into advertising, and so a lot of the same sort of principles sort of apply, and that's quite sort of troubling to me, because essentially what they're doing is they're using something, quite innate and scientific, like the way that the human mind works and the way that it can be manipulated, and they're using it to sell cat food or something like that, and often in ways that people aren't aware of, and that's what sort of really interested me. And then I learned to be a hypnotherapist, and around a similar sort of time I got introduced to the film The Manchurian Candidate, and obviously the books of people like John D. Marks and such like that, and other Walter Boas and other mind control authors. And I started to look at the sort of declassified MK Ultra documents and realised that, wow, actually a lot of this is very, very plausible. Not only just the sort of say taking over somebody's mind in the sort of scenario of a Manchurian Candidate, utilising anything like drugs or hypnosis or various other sort of what would be called psychotronic weapons, which is essentially sort of electronic devices. I discovered that there was a huge amount of evidence that these things have been tested and used and admitted to have been used in field operations, often in places like World War II, for example. They were trying out things like use of drugs as truth serums, and use of hypnosis as ways of couriering messages without the person knowing that they actually had a message, and various things like that, utilizing sort of splitting personalities in order to drop somebody behind enemy lines and make them a convincing turncoat, only later to flip their personality back and stuff like that. And essentially there's different types of mind control, but there's things like truth serums, and then the flip side of that, which would be sort of controlling your mind or creating things so that propaganda can't be or information can't be excised from you in an interrogation scenario. The third type would be essentially controlling individuals via a sort of Manchurian Candidate type way, like a personalized approach. And then the fourth way would be the broadest, which is controlling of people via propaganda systems, societal setups, and sort of what is essentially called the manufacturing of consent, whereby, and this is an Edward Bernays or a Walter Lippmann process they both had. One was called the engineering, one was called the manufacturing of consent. And essentially what this is whereby society functions in such a way that the people at the very top set out what is normal or what is accepted or what is right. And as I'm sure that your listeners are aware, when you start to sort of have a poke around at these things, you find out that the people at the very top perhaps don't really have your best interests at heart, and perhaps are really only interested in maintaining the status quo and retaining their fabulous wealth and hold on society. And that troubles me, to be quite honest.
No, absolutely, and it should trouble you. It troubles the hell out of me. Don Jeffries, thoughts?
Yeah, exactly. I mean, I assume you have talked about, and I apologize if because I haven't read much of your work. But I assume you've probably covered the hideous Dr. Frankenstein-like work of Gottlieb and Cameron.
Yes. Absolutely.
Yeah, you want to expound, because I mean I've written about that in my books, but this of course is something that our government funded through our intelligence agency. So I mean, talk a little bit about that if you could.
Well, I mean, Ewan Cameron was actually in Canada, but the only reason they moved it to Canada was so that they could actually get away with it, really, which is really, really horrible. It was at the Allen Memorial Institute at McGill University, as far as I recall. And essentially, he had this concept of psychic driving. First, what he would do was he had a cheery little name for it. It was called the annihilation of the mind. Now, essentially, what was horrible about Ewan Cameron was that his experimentation was sold as a beneficial medical procedure. Essentially, he was getting people who were alcoholics, and mostly it was actually ladies with postpartum depression, or just common organ depression, anxiety, that type of thing. And his idea was that he would wipe out the harmful imprints on the mind, or the harmful patterns on the mind, which was called either depatterning or annihilation. And he would do this with huge amounts of drugs and narcosis, essentially, like putting people into comas and fixing them in place for huge amounts of time. Then to repattern them, or to input the more beneficial ideas, what he would do is record their own voice, and then he would put irremovable headphones on their head, and they would repeat certain phrases over and over and over and over again. All the time they were being given drugs like LSD and scopolamine and various other sort of crazy things that are best left alone, or particularly not given to people in trauma situations like that. And this was called psychic driving. And now, initially, they would use their patients' own voices, but very soon they found that this sent people sort of irreversibly mad a lot of the time, because they just could not stand to hear their own voice being critical of themselves over and over and over again. So they would record somebody else's voice. But essentially, the result was the same. It would completely wipe the personality and mind of the patient. And one of the most famous of these was a lady called Linda McDonald, who essentially, I've got to stop saying essentially, sorry, who went into the hospital with very, very sort of mild or sort of certainly treatable depression, postpartum depression, and was left in a state where she couldn't use the toilet. She had to learn to walk. She had to learn to speak even. She doesn't know her daughter, and she doesn't know her family. She has been told time and time and time again that this is your husband, this is your daughter, these are your siblings or whatnot. But unfortunately, she just simply has no memories past the last however many years since she recovered from the treatment. And what was really, really even worse about this was that this was part of the MK Ultra experiments. I think it was Subproject 68, but I may be wrong on that one. But it wasn't just in America. There was a gentleman in London called William Sargent, who was at St Thomas's Hospital, and he did exactly the same thing. He had a sleep room in St Thomas's Hospital and was doing psychic driving, essentially. And one of the people that he treated was Celia Imrie, who actually went on to be a famous actress in the UK. I think she's been in some Hollywood films, so you might have seen her in some things, but she's a very, very, very sort of famous actress in England. Once he wrote to William Sargent once wrote to Ewan Cameron, congratulating on the results of his experimentation, where he was, wiping the minds of hapless individuals without their consent. But he signed this letter off by saying, "Don't remember, whatever you manage to achieve in this field, I did it first," which shows that the British arm of this experiment was more advanced. It's just that we don't know as much about that.
It's incredible because, everybody wants to take credit for something that's so ridiculous in my point. And we have no idea what we're doing. And I touch on this often, but we have zero idea what we're messing with and why we're messing with it. That's just me. Now we have these lasers that talk to you. I don't know if you're aware, but they have these lasers, the Pentagon, that implant ideas in people's heads now.
Raytheon were testing those in the late 90s. They were advertised as it's called synthetic telepathy, and it was advertised as a way to non-violently control prisoners in maximum security facilities. Beautiful. But it was also, there's been many sort of iterations of that type of thing. It basically, who was the chap that actually did it? It was the Frey auditory effect was one of them. Basically, they found that people who were standing next to microphones or microwaves in sort of battlefield scenarios were hearing sort of loud knocking sounds and stuff like that. And what they were able to do was piggyback words onto that and sort of put it so that it would go into people's head. There was also the Smirnoff patent, which was used during the Waco siege. Sorry, it wasn't actually used during the Waco siege. They decided not to. What this does is it basically, as you just described, you can't hear it. You can hear a voice in your head, and they can direct this at your head. And so, with people may not remember that at Waco, there was a siege where a supposed cult called the Seventh-day Adventists had shot at or allegedly shot at some ATF agents who were stockpiling weapons. And there was a religious aspect of it where the leader of this group, David Koresh, believed himself to be the second coming of Christ and was going to reveal the seven seals. Anyway, it all ended in being the Adventists being set on fire and then shot to death and murdered by the ATF. So it didn't go terribly well. But at one point, to try and get them out, they thought about using this thing called the Smirnoff patent, and as I say, it was going to put voices in David Koresh's head. They specifically got Charlton Heston to record like a series of dialogue. I'm serious. And he was going to pretend to be God and speak to David Koresh and tell him to let his followers go, or peacefully surrender to the ATF. But they were told that there was a 60% chance that it would work, but there's a 40% chance that he would go mad and slit everybody's throats. They decided to be more sporting and set fire to the front of the building instead.
Well, I've written a lot about Waco. I hadn't heard that Charlton Heston was going to be hired for that. That's interesting. But I do know that they supposedly played sounds of rabbits being killed and the loud. I forget. I think it was these boots are made for walking. They played
Roses and Metallica.
Yeah.
That's common. In fact, the band Skinny Puppy from Canada, they sued because portions of their music I'm a fan actually, but it's very abrasive music and very unusual music, and portions of that was being played in Guantanamo Bay. Because the idea behind all of that as well is it's a concept called isolation and overstimulation, and it's the prima facie that actually came out of William Sargent and Ewan Cameron's experimentation. They found that if you isolate somebody and you overstimulate them, what it will do is they'll basically become psychotic. Another way to do that is to leave somebody in an isolation tank for far too long. Like, a lot of people don't realise that the first isolation tanks, who was it that did it? It was John Lilly, wasn't it? The first use of the isolation tank, where you float in salt water, was a torture device. Because if you leave people in there for too long, their brain starts to fill in the gaps and they hallucinate, and you start to lose all track of time, and you can become psychotic. And that's what they were trying to achieve with Waco, and it's what they're trying to achieve in Guantanamo Bay by basically keeping them awake and isolated and overstimulated. One of the things that I have noticed of recent is that isolation and overstimulation perfectly describes being on Facebook or being on Twitter.
Absolutely. Hey, John, I'm going to get you in just 1 sec. I'm going to go to you right now. But I want to point out that it's very important that this is the technology that I spoke about is being presented as if it's something new, right? So it's really important to figure out that this has been used as far back as the 90s, and I would venture to say probably way before that, in my opinion.
Absolutely.
Yeah,
I mean, they were experimenting with it in the 60s.
I agree 100%, and I think, and I've said this before on my last broadcast, but I think it's not out of the realm of the possible that this has been used in some of these, mass killings or with some of these mass murderers that say, they've heard voices in their head. It has to be explored at this point. It just has to, whether it has any basis in reality or not. I think it does, just based on the evidence. But anyway, John, let me get you in here real quick. Thoughts on what we've been talking about?
I mean, everything Neil has said, I 100% agree with him, and his research parallels my own. They've been using voice to skull technology since forever. It's definitely, it's only now being disclosed to the American public that they're able to beam thoughts directly. You can hear voices, you might hear old stuff that we learned about Project Bluebeam, where you might see God, but you also might hear God. So it's all similar to all of that, and they've had that technology now for a long time. And actually, like Neil's work on Manson too as well, and that ties into a mind control operation as well. Jimmy Jeans talked a lot about that, and into the microcosm with Epic Journeyman. So it all interconnects. And of course, when we talk about the Council for National Policy later, it's very interesting too as well if their connections to mind war and psyops with Paul Valeri and Michael Aquino. They're all interconnected with one another. So yeah, everything that Neil has been saying, everything that Don had been saying, everything I definitely agree with.
All right, beautiful. Don, do you have anything else?
No, I think it's just amazing for people to consider how many of these projects are paid for by taxpayer dollars. I don't know that in the UK, but in our money is so. I mean, during the same time period, I'm sure everyone here knows that the CIA had quite an LSD thing going on with Alan Dulles. I think at one point was the biggest distributor of LSD in the world, and you had people like Dr. Frank Olson, who leaped to his either was pushed out of a window or leaped to his death because he was on a bad trip, and his sons are still trying to sue over that. All these decades later, but just monstrous stuff going on, and it all did revolve around trying to manipulate the minds of people. And I think maybe we can talk at some point about Sirhan, who I think is probably the most visible example of mind control to those of us that research these things.
Just in regards to Frank Olson, the one thing that I had heard, and it's not been confirmed, obviously, but they found that he had a piece of his skull punched out the back of his head, which suggests that he was dead before he even hit the window, and that he wasn't actually on acid. He was given the acid sort of a week before. This is one of the different things. I'm not saying it is correct. The interesting thing about this bit of his skull being knocked out the back of the head was a technique that was perfected by a chap called George Hunter White, and George Hunter White just so happened to be in the building on that day. And he was also a CIA agent. I forget the name of the agent that was actually there to help supposedly to be there with Frank Olson. But George Hunter White ran Operation Midnight Climax. Operation Midnight Climax was a CIA brothel that was set up in San Francisco. And they basically paid the prostitutes to secretly slip LSD to their clients, and then George Hunter White would sit there through watching them on a two-way mirror. He had a little setup basically which had a toilet, a desk, and a load of whiskey because he was a big heavy drinker, and he would just sit there and basically watch these guys freak out on acid and record their responses. He actually, one of his pastimes was to wander up and down the restaurant district of, I think it was in San Francisco, and surreptitiously just dose people with acid, and then sit on the other side of the boardwalk and watch the carnage envelop. And what he'd actually done was he'd employed a magician who at the time was the best sleight of hand magician in the country. His name was, I'm going to get this wrong, I think it was Jim McDonald, or maybe Jack McDonald. No, John Mulholland, sorry. And yeah, he basically taught CIA agents how to do sleight of hand tricks so that they could put acid into people's drinks.
Fighting the Cold War with your tax dollars.
This is insane. We've been talking a lot about drugs, right? And how that's been used to manipulate, and pretty well laid out at this point that's just one of the things that are used by the culture controllers and the culture manipulators to do what it is they want to do, right? Or get to, where they want to get, or pull us to where they want to pull us, right?
Yeah,
now,
I mean, it can be. I mean, the best explanation of that is the Jolly West speech, which I can't really remember off accurately. Mm-hmm. But the gist of it is that basically you can use drugs in a number of ways. You can use it to get people away from, if you're in a stoned funk, you're not quite feeling like going and protesting. You can use it to criminalize people. You can use it to delegitimize people by saying, oh, why are we listening to those silly long-haired druggies? You can also use it to get people involved in crime, in as much as sort of stings, blackmail operations and that types of thing. So it's an incredibly useful tool, and it's no coincidence that if you look at the major importer of drugs into America, it's either the CIA or done with the blessing of the CIA. And there's numerous examples of that, like Freeway Ricky Ross. I can't remember the guy. What was his name?
Gary Webb.
Yeah, Gary Webb basically exposed that. What's his? I can't remember his name, but his Nicaraguan contact was essentially they're later given a job within the State Department. There's ample evidence that suggests that El Chapo and the Sinaloa cartel were basically given free access to take their drugs into Chicago, drugs and guns into Chicago by the ATF and FBI and CIA in exchange for information supposedly against rival cartels, which is just laughable, really. I mean, it goes some way to explaining the carnage that's happening in Chicago a couple of decades later. There's even evidence that suggests that the Los Zetas, the ones that are incredibly violent, that chop people's heads off and stuff like that they've received joint training with CIA and Mossad and IDF agents. And it's like, oh, come on. Like, these are essentially proxy control organizations, aren't they, really? Whilst criminal organizations do exist, and obviously, like, a lot of them have an uneasy relationship. I mean, look at Barry Seal the Mena, Arkansas and stuff like that. They have an uneasy relationship with law enforcement to an extent because it serves their purpose. I mean, the entire crack epidemic was. I mean, this is where it gets really, really funky. Like the Iran-Contra thing. We're selling, or Reagan's selling weapons to Iraq and Iran, and he's using this to finance a far-right takeover of the leftist Nicaragua with the Contras, teaching them with CIA methods that involve raping people, dismembering people, biting the heads off animals and that type of thing to instill fear into the population. And then they're running cocaine back into America, and this is being sold in South Central and various other black neighborhoods. It's being encouraged by the pervasive music at the time, and it's also connected to the proliferation of films like Scarface and stuff like that. I appreciate this sounds like a weird tangent, but the point that I'm trying to get at is what was the initial point of that? Was it to sell weapons to Iran? Was it to sell weapons to Iraq? Was it to promote the coup in Nicaragua? Or was it to destroy black neighborhoods? Because all of those things happened. So it's horrible to think which one was top of the list.
Yeah, probably a little bit of everything, right? And
well,
don't worry about the drugs, man. We're building a wall here. It's going to stop all that.
That's so silly. Like the thing that gets me about the war that nobody seems to have understood, aside from the fact that, as you quite rightly say, it won't work. It's not how drugs and stuff get into the country. It will take years and years and years and years. And in order to build it, you're going to need to move hundreds and hundreds of people into those areas, which will radically change those areas because you'll need to have infrastructure for all the new people that are living there. They will be white and American. Well, they might be. But basically, you're still going to have an influx of people in order to create this thing, which is going to take about 20 years and cost. It's such a white elephant. I don't know if you got that expression in America. It just means something that's pointless.
Yeah, we absolutely do. John, go ahead, jump in real quick, and then I want to get into some new types of drugs. Come on, John.
Yeah. So Neil, a couple of things about the Iran-Contra affair, and of course the Council for National Policies.
Oh yes, absolutely.
So
John, real quick, I don't want to jump into that just yet, just because. Okay. Like I want to lead to that before we get into Iran-Contra. So don't get too deep. Go ahead.
Okay, I won't. So we were Iran. Israel was who was giving the weapons to Iran, and we were resupplying Israel.
Oh, okay.
during the Iran-Contra affair.
Right.
As well as you're talking with the drugs, Freeway Rick Ross, the work of Gary Webb and the Dark Alliance, and you could debate whether or not he was assassinated or not, or he committed suicide. But you talk about the Reagan administration's involvement in that. They were also involved with the Franklin scandal, and allegedly Nicaraguan bonds were being transferred between Oliver North and Lawrence E. King, with Michael Aquino being the head of all that. So you have that connection too as well. Of course, the right was heavily involved with the Franklin scandal, both Ronald Wilson Reagan and George H.W. Bush. Being implicated in the callboy scandal to the White House as well with Craig Spence. So that's all of what was going on during that time. There was drug running, trafficking, human trafficking, and gun running to fund multiple coups in the attempt to overthrow socialist governments and replace them with fascist governments. No argument here on as far as politics are concerned, which is but nonetheless, whatever you want to say about Daniel Ortega and his government, the Sandinistas, the Contras were violent. They were not. It was guerrilla warfare against the Nicaraguan population, propped up by our own CIA. Absolutely. And the vested interest of the CNP. So it's just it's very interesting about that. Depending on who you ask, you'll have Oliver North on Fox News and War Stories, and Sean Hannity calling Oliver North a great American and saying what we did over there. Even Alex Jones now is saying that the Iran-Contra affair was a good thing, and Ronald Wilson Reagan was a great president. Rex 84 is not for us. The FEMA camps are not for us. They were for illegal immigrants are going to come across the border from the destabilization of the Iran-Contra affair. So it's just mind-blowing of how they're still defending this to this day, Neil.
But that's the point, and you're dead right. You're absolutely right, and thank you for that information on Israel, because I was not aware of that. But this is the whole point, isn't it? This is what mind control is. People would think it's something grand, like putting a chip in someone's head or something. It's not. It's perception management. If you can change InfoWars, if you can get InfoWars fans to all of a sudden do a 180-degree turn and now be fans of Ronald Reagan. Like, it wasn't so long ago that Alex Jones was calling the cops jackbooted thugs. Yeah. Right? Okay. Yeah. And doing decent stuff like his police state films, showing infiltration of the black bloc and stuff like that. And then again, he just totally flipped and went against all of his past sort of discoveries and exposes and
he's the one who popularized the term the left-right paradigm, and that's where we got it from. And I, as someone who in my book Hidden History, Billy Ray can test. I mean, I wrote about all the subjects John was just talking about in depth in there, and it was awful to hear Alex start excusing the Rex 84 things, which he had obviously been criticizing before. But you're right, he was completely different. I watched him the other day for the first time in a long time.
He's turned into Rush Limbaugh.
Yeah. Well, he's not even.
Drunker,
I don't think he's even as extreme as Rush Limbaugh anymore, because I thought, I don't know if you know the speech Trump made a couple of days ago in which he completely, basically gave what was left of his supporters one final swift kick, because he basically came out for red flag gun confiscation.
Yeah.
He basically said, he just sounded like one of his critics. Not that it will change whether they treat him, but Alex Jones didn't. I thought, well, let me see what he says about this speech. He literally didn't say anything about it. And he
I've noticed that as well. Like,
working with the social. Yeah, it's amazing.
Talking points.
Yeah, it's just amazing. He didn't even mention the speech, and I said, this is unbelievable. And it's.
Sorry, I don't know if I have the timeline correct on this, but didn't Alex Jones start flipping about the time he was having a very expensive divorce?
Yes, it was around that time. It was around, actually, it's pretty much, you can actually trace it back to. And I guess we're getting ahead of ourselves because Alex Jones has always been in bed with the CNP. But nonetheless, it was around the time where Roger Stone showed up, around 2000.
Even before that, I feel.
Beginning 2015.
Yeah, I think it was even before that. Go ahead, Don.
I think it was the Trump campaign, and somebody who had a little contact with Roger Stone. Roger Stone actually loved my book Hidden History, and he called me, and we talked on the phone. This is before he became kind of a household name, and he was and in fact, he actually asked me, because I had been on InfoWars once, only one time, never asked back, and he said, "What's your secret getting on there?" And, he later became, like the co-star about.
Worked there, yeah, he works for them.
Yeah, but he was telling me, he's the one who really got me interested in Trump because he said I've known him 30 years and he knows about all the conspiracies. You're going to love him. I said, okay.
That always when I found out that Roger Stone and Paul Manafort essentially created the concept of lobbying through Manafort, Black and Stone, that was when I was like, and Alex Jones, come on, if I know that, Alex Jones knows that, okay, which is again was the mainstay of his argument for a long time was corporate interests in infecting politics from outside, or although he doesn't tend to talk about the NRA, but anyway. But do you know what I mean? And again, that's just a real red flag. Roger Stone is not a man to be trusted.
No, I want to take it back real quick, right? Because we were talking about just because we got into Alex, but there's a reason why Alex flipped, or like John mentioned, he might have been compromised from the beginning, right? And we just it was an operation of some sort. I don't know. Now we talked about drugs, and the new drug is technology. Right, that's the new drug. Social media is the new drug, right? The military-industrial complex has realized something, that they needed to merge with the technocrats, and the technocrats and the military-industrial complex have come together, and now we're in deep trouble. Yeah. Right? Cambridge Analytica.
Here's an interesting point
Go
as
ahead,
well.
Go ahead. Come on.
The sort of cognitive dissonance of certain people is that Trump, I've been reliably informed by Trump, Breitbart, all these other places, basically, that the deep state is Facebook, Google, and the other one, Twitter, and that basically they're absolutely against the Trump administration and they're the enemy. Well, Trump announced the other day, or the Trump administration announced the other day, that in this coming trade deal, or a supposed trade deal with the UK, one of the things he insisted on was that those three companies pay no tax in the UK. I say, oh, that's weird. It's almost like it totally contradicts everything that you've been saying.
Well, he also said we want to work with these social media sites, and then again, most of the people that have been banned from these sites were people like Alex Jones and people that supported Trump, and he really gave it to his supporters by saying that, and talked about hate crimes and speeding up the due process of law, which is very frightening. Let's just execute him. I mean, it was one of the worst speeches I've ever heard an American president deliver.
Neil, react to that, and then we'll keep going. Go ahead.
No, you're absolutely correct, basically, because Trump wouldn't have got elected without social media, without those three platforms.
That's exactly where I want to go, right? Because Trump wouldn't have got elected without social media, so it's almost like doublespeak. Talk to us about Cambridge Analytica. Talk to us about it. Give us something.
Okay, so Cambridge Analytica it no longer exists, but it's a data mining corporation. Its slogan is data-driven behavior change, and what it promises and has done since it was created in about 2013 with money from Robert Mercer, who's very right-leaning, shall we say, a billionaire and hedge fund owner who is also involved in artificial intelligence and good friend of ex-Goldman Sachs banker and a proud racist, Steve Bannon. And what they did was they put money into this company called SCL. SCL is a PSYOPs firm that's run by a gentleman called Nigel Oakes, who used to be, or claims to have been, an MI5 spy. What these companies do is they control elections. That's what they boast about doing. If you've got enough money, they will go into and they will do a campaign that will win an election. Excuse me. Now, Cambridge Analytica got exposed by a couple of people, one in a Channel 4 documentary showing the sorts of things that they might do in order to win elections. And they would go as far as doing honey traps, which is sending beautiful women and compromising people so that they could be blackmailed. They would go so far as to setting up fake companies and offering people incredibly lucrative jobs that then they would again use as blackmail because these companies would be exposed to be dodgy in some way or whatever. So all these types of espionage scenarios in order to manipulate people behind the scenes in politics, which is on its own incredibly nefarious. Excuse me. why do companies exist whose sole purpose is to go against the democratic principle of an election and to do it in a secretive way to the highest bidder? So what happened with Cambridge Analytica, who were set up by these people and were behind the Trump campaign and the most recent Leave campaign for the UK to leave the European Union? There's been a referendum a couple of years ago, and they were responsible for the Leave campaign. They were successful on both of these campaigns, and how they did this, which they admitted to, was now there are echoes of you and Cameron in this, in as much as they mined your data, they stole it and bought some of it, and also manipulated you by making you do quizzes. They wouldn't make you do quizzes, but they did quizzes which you seemed they thought were innocuous, but they're basically building up data points about you, what you like, what you don't like, what triggers you, what makes you angry, what makes you sad, what makes you happy. And they're monitoring you. They're monitoring your messages, your texts, they're monitoring all your Facebook activity. Alexander Nix, the CEO of Cambridge Analytica, at one point said that they had over 5,000 data points on every single American of voter age. Now, let's just say that I'm supposed to play a prank on you and make you scared. If I know nothing about you, it's probably going to be difficult. If I know you're scared of spiders, well, that's a lot easier. If I know 5,000 things about you, and how you're going to react to certain situations because I've tested it again and again and again, then I can control you, I can manipulate you. Well, how did they do this? Well, they started looking at your likes, and Aaron Banks, who was the campaign manager for Leave.eu and main donor to the Brexit Party, he said, and UKIP, he said that a like is the most incredible thing, the most beneficial thing that we can have, because we put it into the AI algorithms, and the computer never stops watching you, and the computer never stops building a picture of you and learning about you. And he was told that that was really, really creepy. And he says, yeah, I know. That's why I'm not on Facebook. Anyway, so what they'd do is they'd find out what you like, what you don't like, and then they'd start micro-targeting you. Now, how this works is they create adverts specifically targeted at your trigger points. They will be specifically for you, and most of them were produced on a platform called Gatestone Media, which is owned by Nina Rosenwald, who is the woman who's the heir to the Sears network. She's also involved in Rebel Media. They would create stories that were going to hype people up, mostly about immigration and about terrorism, and a lot of them had a certain amount of racism in there, because they found that this was pushing people's buttons. As early as 2014, they discovered that the phrase "lock her up" was going to be really effective for Hillary Clinton, because people really didn't like her and they liked the idea of putting her in prison. They discovered the idea of people swarming over a wall, and the idea of building a wall for security was really resonating with voters. They also discovered that people felt disenfranchised, and people felt that the establishment was corrupt, and that they really wanted to drain the swamp. They also basically came up with the phrase "Make America Great Again," and they came up with all these talking points that were the mainstay of Trump: lock her up, build the wall. What were the other ones that he shouted? Drain the swamp. Oh, sorry. And the concept of the deep state. They discovered from these quizzes and from these likes that people were very, very concerned of intelligence operations and the power behind the power. And so they very, very cleverly manipulated that and created phrases that they knew would be good for their candidate as early as 2014. And they were actually going to be used by Ted Cruz, who was the original candidate in America. But then they found that Donald Trump was actually more presentable on television and was more saleable. So they, halfway through the campaign, switched and went to Donald Trump. At the same time, so you're getting all these micro-targeted adverts that are riling you up, making you angry, really, really sort of directing you. They're directing you to a whole node of new media like Breitbart, Drudge Report, InfoWars, who are all repeating these same stories about creeping Sharia law in Germany, and creeping Sharia law in Italy, and creeping Sharia law in France, and a 13-year-old girl being raped and the perpetrator not being punished in Sweden, and what was the other one? And child marriages now being legal in Europe to appease Muslims. None of those stories are true. There are other stories as well, like the idea that Hillary Clinton was a cannibal and that she got the Kuru disease. That was actually a Cambridge Analytica invention. The idea that Julian Assange had unearthed that Hillary Clinton had personally financed ISIS. That was also a Cambridge Analytica invention. The idea that the Pope had said that Trump was a great man was also a Cambridge Analytica invention. So you're getting all these stories, they're appealing to you, and then you're getting a whole raft of new friends, because what they do is they create sock puppet accounts. Sock puppet accounts are, it's a fake account, but the algorithms and the AI is so sophisticated now that basically, sometimes they're run by a person who'll be running like 30 different accounts, but often they're just basically, they interact, they're bots. And these were getting so sophisticated that they were having conversations with people, directing people, showing them new, perhaps even more extreme sites, like the Daily Stormer and things like that, directing them to online content like Stephen Crowder and Turning Point USA and PragerU, and all of these different things which are essentially giving you the same message over and over again, which just so happen to be the lies and campaigns of Cambridge Analytica. Cambridge Analytica just so happens to be a weapon. It is considered weapons-grade communication tactics. It is a psychological warfare weapon of the British government and is under export control, which means that it cannot be used without the say-so of the British government, which means that elements of the British government, and as we will find out later, elements of the CIA, wanted Trump to be elected. That is beyond doubt, because they're the weapon of the British government, which was also used by Mossad to elect Viktor Orban in Hungary, and also to elect Bolsonaro in Brazil, and also to promote and to elect Modi in India, and to promote Salvini and Geert Wilders and Nigel Farage and Marine Le Pen and Alice Waddell. Are we seeing any particular pattern here? And this was all done via a mechanism that is considered a psychological warfare weapon of the UK government and of, to an extent, the Israeli and American government.
So we've all been manipulated, but the manipulation runs very, very deep.
Yes.
As we can tell, even though I didn't vote for Trump, but I can understand how a lot of people did. They played at the emotions of so many people.
Of course, that was the clever thing, and that's what really so galling about it, is because they knew that people felt disenfranchised. They, quite rightly so, they knew that people felt cheated. And so what they've been doing is they've been stoking this concept of popularism, the man of the people, the man who's just like you. He says it like it is. He talks like you. You could have a beer with him. And yet, strangely, at the same time, all of these people are multi-millionaires or billionaires, which seems a bit incongruous to me. But yeah, no, that's entirely what they did. They played on people's fears. They found out what made you tick. They found out what made you afraid, and they used that in order to manipulate you in the way that they wanted you to go. And even if you want to take it further, to clamour for that because you felt that it was going to be good for you, and it was going to be a way to fight back again against the deep state. You were going to drain the swamp. You were going to, make America great again. With the Brexit, with the EU referendum, the Vote Leaves slogan was "Take back control," and again, that's incredibly appealing. I totally understand it, and unfortunately, it would appear that the more you look into it, the more that turns out to not be true. That essentially the things that they were promising you either had already or weren't there. I mean, that is an important point as well. Every bit of propaganda has to have an element of truth in it. People do feel, rightly or wrongly, threatened by multiculturalism, threatened by concepts of immigration, threatened about ideas of losing their job, right? So they played on those fears, and either expanded them to ludicrous degrees, or just simply made them up because they fit that narrative. And that's the problem. And it was genius at the same time. Okay, what was Trump saying? What was he saying about the media? Fake news. Yeah. So anybody that was going, that's not true, that's not true, that's not true, all of a sudden would met with, well, that's because it's fake news, it's the media. You've got this almost cult-like concept where people are drawn almost evangelically towards this savior figure. Now, here's the other thing. There were proven factories that were set up in, I think it was in Macedonia, where they hired students to essentially write and spread fake pro-Trump, anti-Hillary Clinton propaganda all over the place. And they found a few of these entire factories that they're set up to do this. Now, it was never actually sort of revealed where this was coming from. Now, a lot of people are expecting me to start shouting Russia at this point. No. Right, this is nuanced. If you don't think that Russia were trying to influence our election, then you're a bit silly, because of course they were, because everyone is trying to affect everybody's election. Did they do it effectively to the degree that it is being portrayed at? I don't think so. And I've read the Mueller report and I agree with what he says, but I think that is essentially a cover. That was not very effective. I think that is a cover for Cambridge Analytica's connections to British and American intelligence.
That makes perfect sense to me, and we're going to explore all that. I got a couple of questions, then I'm going to get the guys in here to, react to what you just dropped on us, right? So I was under the impression that Ted Cruz actually bowed out of this, not that he was passed up for Trump. I might be wrong, but just tell me about it.
Well, as far as I'm aware, basically Robert Mercer, who is, again, the billionaire who's backing him, Mercer Technologies, his daughter is Rebecca Mercer. She's good friends with Ivana Trump. He's the guy that put the money into SCL to create Cambridge Analytica, and he's also the person who put the money into Breitbart and Rebel Media. So all the nodes of Rebel Media are also connected to this. This is how clever this was. It created a whole host of alt media and basically utilized that to spread its propaganda, like pretending that it was anti-establishment when it clearly isn't. What happened apparently was, can you remember when the WikiLeaks came out and it found out that Hillary Clinton and the DNC were illegally putting campaign, they were promoting Donald Trump in conservative newspapers, because what happened was they saw what a buffoon he was, what a clown he was. I still, to this day, don't think Donald Trump wanted to be president. I think he wanted to lose so that he could rally against the evils of the deep state, but whatever. But anyway, what happened was basically this gave them a huge amount of free publicity. The DNC promoted Trump in a sort of false flag way as, here's the guy you want, here's the guy you want. And it backfired. It gave him a huge amount of free publicity, and Robert Mercer being rather savvy, when, you know what, this guy actually has got a lot of, he's going to appeal to that swing state voter, that undecided person, because we can paint a personality on him. I mean, you've got to remember, like, he was a liberal. He was a pro-life New York liberal for the majority of his life. And then all of a sudden he's basically espousing Heritage Foundation policies, essentially. But that's what happened. Apparently, Robert Mercer went to this think tank in America called the Heritage Foundation and proposed to several people there that Ted Cruz would not be as good a candidate as Donald Trump. Apparently, all the candidates had to do a speech. There was like a half-an-hour speech at the Heritage Foundation, and at the end of the day, they decided to change their allegiance to Donald Trump. Well, preliminary, because they had to check with another think tank, which we'll come on to later. Mm-hmm. But that is the what has been reported. In fact, I think that was even Robert Mercer or Rebecca Mercer that sort of copped to that one. But yeah, that's certainly what I've found.
Perfect, Neil. Perfect. And you touched on Heritage, and we're going to touch on that. And I know John has some stuff on the Heritage Foundation and that other think tank that nobody will talk to me about except for Neil and John. So I want to know more about that. Don, I'm going to get you in here real quick, right? it appears that our thoughts are not our own. I think that's putting it mildly. Go ahead, Don, react.
Well, yeah, absolutely. I mean, we're clearly, most people don't think I think Thomas Edison said way back when that only 1% of the people are capable of independent thought, and this was before a lot of these huge organizations and the technology we have now. But getting to Trump, I mean, I have essentially concluded now that he's basically he's an actor and essentially a crisis actor. He's really no different than what you see in some of these productions that they're constantly out there. And this, I think he was hired to play a role. And I think we can see on the other side, the left-right paradigm, that the AOC has admittedly, her brother has said she was hired for the part. So I thought it was interesting when you said all the candidates had to give a speech, because I think this may be becoming clear to everyone that these people are hired to play roles. And I don't know that any of them have any real principles, because certainly in Trump's case, his entire history refutes what he was saying, and a lot of us were fooled enough by people tell me, because I voted for him, and I said, look, I don't regret doing it. It's not like I had a choice. I just took a chance that maybe the way America's structured, the only way we're ever going to get an outsider in, it would have to be a disgruntled renegade billionaire, because that's the only way you could possibly. So I thought, well, maybe this guy has been seeing this stuff for a long time, and he silently objected to it. Of course, I mean, obviously, I knew there wasn't much of a chance, but, I don't know, as they say, if voting could change anything, they'd make it illegal.
Yeah, exactly.
Absolutely. I mean, you nailed it there, mate, because that's precisely the thing. They sold the man. They sold the idea of the man. I mean, I remember when he started, I can't remember what but he had 7 things that he was going to do. One of them was going to be limit term times, and one of them was going to be something like that. And it was like, you're not going to do any of those things, because those require Congress to pass them, and essentially what you're asking them to do is shoot themselves in the foot. And that was ridiculous. But you're right, they sold the idea of the guy. And what's really important to know as well, and for people to understand from my perspective, is that Hillary Clinton was awful. You didn't want Hillary Clinton as a president, for crying out loud. She's a terrible monster of a person.
Yeah, exactly.
And that also was what Cambridge Analytica preyed on, was the fact that basically she was far more unpopular than she actually thought she was. She thought that basically this was a shoo-in, and like, come on. She was arrogant, and that arrogance came off. And Trump, I think, expertly played on that by rebuffing that, but by pinching her nose, or if you like, I mean, he showed up her arrogance, and so I totally get it, because it was very, very clever marketing.
Back to the John. I'm gonna get you in here because I know you got notes, and I know you're itching, so I'm gonna get you in here right now. But back to the comment that Don made about Trump being an actor and a hired one at that. I think there's some merit to it. Definitely with AOC, she has admitted to it. But let's look at Donald Trump. We don't need him to admit to it. We know where he comes from and what he's done. Reality television and the WWE. And I'm going to go back to it. I'm going to go back to the professional wrestling aspect of this. This guy can cut a promo better than anyone. He knows how to talk. He can hold an audience. He knows how to deliver a message. They gave him the message, he delivered it. He knows how to play people, because that's what he needs to do in a professional wrestling scene. He's a WWE Hall of Famer, okay?
Somebody sent me a video yesterday, and I'd not seen it, and I'd not made the connection. Do you remember that Stephen King film, The Dead Zone?
I don't actually.
Donald Trump is remarkably similar to the Martin Sheen character who becomes president just so that he can destroy the world and be famous.
Wow.
Somebody sent me a clip of it. It's Stephen King actually talking about it, and very, very similar techniques, rabble-rousing techniques, and rhetoric and presentation techniques and stuff like that. It's quite funny. It's interesting.
I'm gonna have to check that out. Anyway, John, get in here, man. What's up?
So, the term "Make America Great Again," originally came from Ronald Wilson Reagan. The same players that we're talking about now, the Heritage Foundation, and their involvements in the Reagan administration, and their involvements in the Trump administration. Actually, Bill Clinton actually said "Make America Great Again" too during some of his speeches, though it was not his campaign slogan, which is very interesting as well. Deep State, of course, originating possibly from I think it was Turkey, I believe, and
it was Turkey,
and later on, Peter Del Scott using it, and then eventually, being used by Trump. Draining the swamp was actually used far back with the currency reset scams that parallel QAnon. Currently today, you see it, with the dinar, the Iraqi dinar, and everything. You see that, but it was written by a book with Nasara, which was the National Economic Reset Plan. A man named Harvey Barnard. He titled his book "Draining the Swamp: Monetary and Fiscal Policy Reform." So then again, you see how modern day of how the QAnon movement started in the 90s. They used to talk about how white hats within the United States military were going to initially work with Bill Clinton and then eventually overthrow Bill Clinton because he's corrupt. And it's just hilarious how that, goes. And probably will go with the QAnon movement and Trump. Eventually will become undeniable to the point where they have to throw him under the bus. And it's just same old think tanks running these same old scams that they've been running infinitum, just with greater technology now that they're able to do more infiltration that way. But one interesting thing too as well was that Neil, are you aware of John Kenneth Blackwell?
I don't think so, no.
Okay, so John Kenneth Blackwell, there is a controversy surrounding him that he was during the George W. Bush re-election campaign in 2004. It pretty much now, I'm not in defense of George W. Bush. I'm not in defense of John Kerry. They're both the same side, two sides of the same coin.
Skull and bone, pieces of filth. Go ahead.
Yeah, but however, though, John Kenneth Blackwell during that time period was the Secretary of State of Ohio. So it does appear that there was some election fraud with his Diebold machines that occurred. And Ohio was the state. If Kerry would have won Ohio, he would have won the presidency. If Bush would have won Ohio, he would have won, but he did win Ohio, so he would have won he did win the presidency. So it's very interesting of how in 2016 you see almost the same election fraud. And I actually argue, and we'll talk about why later, that Trump has been set up to be the president for I don't know how many years by a certain think tank that we'll get to. Yeah. But John Kenneth Blackwell was on Donald John Trump's election integrity committee, Neil Sanders.
Right. Okay.
And so he may have had an influence in the 2016 elections. He may have had influence in the 2018 elections. And he's really good friends with this Twitter advocate known as Ali Alexander, which I'm pretty sure, Neil, you know who Ali Alexander is. And so him and J. Kenneth Blackwell are very close with one another. And, of course, Ali Alexander gets his funding from Blackwell. He gets his funding from Foster Friess, who is, of course, a part of this other think tank that we're going to talk about in a minute. But I do think that they had a way of shaping the election. Now, I voted for Donald John Trump. I horribly regret it now. I had no idea about this think tank that we were talking about and their involvement in the truth movement. And I fell at hook, line, and sinker, even though if you would have asked me in 2004, has any president ever been for us? 2014, if any president has been for us, I would have said no. At that time, I was more awoke then than I was in 2016 because I fell for Cambridge Analytica's lies. I fell through this think tank that we're going to talk about, their lies, the Heritage Foundation lies. And I voted for Trump. Of course, I woke up slightly after he started appointing people because I was like, wait a minute, these people are swamp creatures. What doesn't make any sense. So it's just interesting. So what do you got to say to any of that information, Neil?
Well, I mean, all of what you said makes perfect sense, and that they're just essentially trotting out the same methodology, but they've hyped up the delivery. That makes perfect sense. I can't argue with anything that you said there. But yeah, I mean, this is the point. I totally understand why people did make these votes. I want to make that clear. It's not like this isn't a criticism. People were put in an incredibly difficult situation, and they were tricked essentially. So what can you do? It's horrific. But yeah, it's very interesting that it all ties back to that particular think tank again.
And I want to talk about it, right? And I want to talk about the rise of conservatism here in the United States and throughout the world, I guess, with Brexit. I want to talk a little bit about Nigel Farage. I want everybody to go to Neil Sanders' website, and I'm gonna put a link to it in the show notes. In particular to this I don't know, graph, I guess. What do I call this? Like it's a
It's
connection map.
It's a lunatic thing.
Yeah. I mean, I want everybody to go check it out, right? So this is NeilSandersMindControl.com. And, have at it, guys. Like, sit there and forget about Netflix for about a week and explore this stuff because it's interesting. But I want to talk about the rise of the right, and the manipulation of the alternative movement, because it's clear that we've been manipulated just through Alex Jones, just to seeing what's going on there. So it's clear that there's something wrong, right? All stuff I want to talk about. But before we do that, I want you to explain what the Heritage Foundation is and how they're important here, because people are going to hear the Heritage Foundation and have no idea what the hell you're talking about. That's just it. It's something new. Let me get Don in real quick, and then I want to hit Heritage Foundation. Come on, Don.
Well, yeah, when you talk about the rise against, I think as I've written about this fake left-right paradigm, I'm a populist. I hope I am a genuine populist. And my hero is Huey Long, who I think was maybe the last powerful genuine populist, and of course he was killed. But when you look at Ronald Reagan, you talk about there were so many parallels to Reagan, because Reagan transformed the right a great deal. Up until that point, the right was concerned more with like anti-communism and things like that. But because of the rise of the neocons, they drifted into this Ayn Rand type of worship of the marketplace, and the greed is good. You remember back in the 80s, one of the best sellers was Looking Out for Number One, and the bumper sticker of choice back then was "He who dies with the most toys wins." So this narcissism became very evident in the 80s, about the same time the consolidation of wealth, as I've wrote about in Survival of the Richest, really started happening, the death of unions and all that stuff. But the right was transformed forever. And Reagan's record against his rhetoric was almost as bad as Trump's, because Reagan didn't even cut a single sub-agency of government. During all his years, the government continued to grow, and he actually raised taxes on everyone except for the 1%. Now, basically the 1% was like Donald Trump's Israel, or Trump is keeping his promises to Israel, not to America. But Reagan did slash taxes, I think, from 72% to 28% or something unbelievable, and also raised the bottom rate from 13% to 15%. But he also, as the great tax cutter, and his people were just as much a cult as Trump's peoples are, that he raised Social Security taxes, and he started taxing Social Security, a double tax. And no one mentions that today, because the right has changed tremendously. Now it's more of a cultural thing, just as the left would change forever in the 90s under Bill Clinton, when they became, instead of being concerned about civil liberties, being anti-war, concerned about the little guy, pro-union, they became this social identity, political correct monstrosity, these authoritarians that want to stifle free speech instead of the old civil libertarians that want to protect free speech.
Well, I mean, that is very interesting that you mentioned Reagan and Clinton, because I think this is possibly a good way to sort of, in a sort of backdoor way, introduce the Heritage Foundation.
Nice.
60%, I think it was 62% actually, 62% of policies enacted by Reagan were taken from the Mandate for Leadership, which is a policy doctrine that was designed by the Heritage Foundation. The Heritage Foundation was formed in the early 70s, 73, essentially by Joseph Coors, or with money from Joseph Coors, the beer magnate, who was described as a little bit right of Attila the Hun. And I also just want to say that all of this information I got because John pointed me in the right direction for this. He pointed me in the direction of his own fabulous research and the book, The Coors Connection. And I wouldn't have known any of this without the help of John. So I just want to make that absolutely 100% clear. It was formed with a gentleman called Paul Weyrich and another man called Edward Fulner. And just to sort of start it off, Paul Weyrich has got some rather dodgy mates, including like Laszlo Pastor, who just so happened to run a pro-Nazi party in Hungary and was basically convicted of collaboration during this or after the Second World War. He's very right-wing, anti-LGBT, and also anti-Semitic beliefs are far from a secret. The point of this think tank, which is pulled in with luminaries like Fred Koch, and other huge business owners, was essentially to counter the Brookings Institution. The Brookings Institution was a think tank that was basically a research centre that was giving sort of research to governments and suggesting policy. And they decided, you know what, we want our own one of these, but we want one that promotes very conservative, right-wing, WASP, essentially, white Anglo-Saxon Protestant, promoting policies and policies that essentially benefit the wealthy. A lot of these people are connected to the oil industry and to the petrochemical industry and to other, stock markets, banking, and that type of thing. The Heritage Foundation is basically a who's who of rich sods. It's got trustees from Chase Manhattan Bank, Dow Chemical, General Motors, Pfizer, Sears, Mobil. And the whole point of this foundation is to come up with things that they think are going to be beneficial to that select group, and they're going to push it to the candidate. And how they do this is by the use of funding. They will deny or give funding. It's really as simple as that to the candidate that they believe is favourable. And to show the influence that they have, that the Heritage Foundation has, the first copy of the mandate for policy was, as I say, so the mandate for leadership, which is policy strategies, 60% of it was used by Reagan, which means that 6 out of 10 of the things that they wanted, the president did for them without asking at all. I've got a long list here, right? Okay, and this is a little bit indulgent, but if you just give me a second, basically, this will give you an idea of what the Heritage Foundation really does. So, Cambridge Analytica, which we've already discussed, was run by Robert Mercer, who is in the Heritage Foundation, and Steve Bannon, who is in the Heritage Foundation, and this was done with the help of British intelligence. The Thatcher government, which was the Prime Minister in the late 70s and for about 11 years in England, they basically based their policies on the Heritage Foundation's recommendation to privatise almost the entirety of British industry. And this was part of their special friendship with Ronald Reagan. So British Petroleum, British Aerospace, Cable and Wireless, Amersham International, National Freight, Brit Oil, Associated British Points, Enterprise Oil, Jaguar, British Telecommunications, British Shipbuilders, British Gas, British Airways, Rolls-Royce, British Steel, BAA, British Water, British Electricity. They were all privatised, which is mostly beneficial to big business, at the request of the Heritage Foundation. That's a think tank from another country dictating the policies that have spiraled out through the ages and had innumerable negative consequences, which is outrageous. As you stated, the Reagan doctrine and the Reagan administration were based on recommendations from the Heritage Foundation. Obamacare was originally a policy that came from the Heritage Foundation. The Clinton policy of removing welfare from huge swathes of people, which is called PRWORA, and increased poverty in poor areas in America by upwards of 50%, was a Heritage Foundation policy. So as you can see, this is they're not shy about who they actually push. They just want them to benefit. Operation Desert Storm was apparently based on the recommendation of the Heritage Foundation. There's a think tank in England called the IEA, which is desperately trying to privatise our NHS, our National Health Service, and make it so that it's not free for all. And basically, politicians in England that were closely connected to Brexit, like David Davis, Boris Johnson, Daniel Hannan, Liam Fox, Michael Gove, they're under its wing, and it is connected to the Heritage Foundation. Turning Point UK it's a new sort of, again, policy arm of the Heritage Foundation, and this is also trying to help with the trade deal in America and basically reduce They want us to reduce our food levels to FDA levels, which is basically, with no offence, but it's not quite as high standard as in Europe at the minute. And Jacob Rees-Mogg is being paid by this organisation, and they're connected to the Heritage Foundation. Turning Point USA is actually financed by the Koch brothers, who are Heritage Foundation, and Betsy DeVos, who is Heritage Foundation. So Candace Owens and Charlie Kirk are basically stooges of big business and big government. But I assume people have figured that out already.
No, they haven't.
William Regnery, who finances Richard Spencer and is behind the NPI and the Charles Martel Society, whose pro-Nazi grandfather came up with the phrase America First, is also connected to the Heritage Foundation and possibly the CNP. Dinesh D'Souza is Heritage Foundation. Reverend Jerry Falwell was Heritage Foundation, and his political party, the Moral Majority, was Heritage Foundation financed. The Mont Pelerin Society and the Bruges Society, which are basically all the pro-Brexit groups, are also financed by the Heritage Foundation. ALEC, who are basically rolling out the Dakota pipeline and are connected to Koch Industries, which is obviously Heritage Foundation. The tax cuts for the rich, the rollback on workers' rights, the attempted coup in Venezuela, which have all been part of Trump's presidency, were all part of the Heritage Foundation's new mandate for leadership. Basically, what they want to do is they want to overthrow someone in Venezuela who will be a stooge for America and give them their OPEC vote, which means that they will, with Brazil, who is now a stooge for America, they will have a controlling percentage, which means they can set world oil prices. Bolsonaro was elected with the help of Cambridge Analytica, which is Heritage Foundation. The Atlas Network, which is a collection of destabilizing think tanks in South America, is financed by the Heritage Foundation. Trump has installed over 60 members of the Heritage Foundation in administrative positions in his administration. Neil Gorsuch, Brett Kavanaugh, Betsy DeVos, Jeff Sessions, Scott Pruitt, Mick Mulvaney, Rick Perry, Mike Pompeo, John Bolton, Mike Pence are all Heritage Foundation and were all proposed for their respective positions by the Heritage Foundation. Steve Bannon, Mike Pence, Kellyanne Conway are also members of the CNP. Breitbart was set up with money from the Mercers, who are Heritage Foundation, and not many people know this, but it was also set up with money from the Koch brothers via GIA, which was Steve Bannon. They are, of course, Heritage Foundation. Americans for Prosperity, which founded the Tea Party movement in America, is a Heritage Foundation group. James O'Keefe and Project Veritas are financed by the Koch brothers, who are a Heritage Foundation. Dave Rubin is financed by George Mason University, which is a Koch brothers subsidiary, and they are obviously Heritage Foundation. Rush Limbaugh, Tucker Carlson, Sean Hannity, Laura Ingraham are all financed by the Koch brothers to keep certain stories down and to hype others on their respective shows. Daily Caller is financed by the Koch brothers. Rebel Media is financed by the Mercers and the Koch brothers. Gatestone Media is financed by the Koch brothers. Glenn Beck was financed by the Koch brothers. Ben Shapiro is financed by the Wilkes brothers, who are big in the fracking industry, and I believe they're Heritage Foundation. They're also putting money into PragerU, as is Dennis Prager, who I know to be Heritage Foundation. Now, the interesting thing about the Heritage Foundation as well is it was set up with money from, of all the strange sources, the Unification Church of Sun Myung Moon, or some would know this as the Moonies. Now, the Moonies were set up by two Japanese fascists and with money from the KCIA. The KCIA has long been exposed as being a conduit of the CIA. It's financed by the CIA to essentially look at North Korea. They finance the Moonies, therefore, and the Moonies finance the Heritage Foundation. Therefore, the Heritage Foundation is financed by the CIA.
Incredible. Incredible. Now, I know John knows a lot about this, as you gave him a ton of credit, and we're going to go to John in a second. I do want to straighten out a couple of things. I want to get some things clear that we didn't talk about, so we're going to do some production live on air. We didn't talk about how much time you have, and we've eclipsed an hour. Typically, what we do is we do an hour. But
okay.
If you have time for me to flesh this out, then I'm good.
I'd assumed we were going for two hours.
That's fine. That's fine with me. It's at least two, so great. Like, I mean, because we have some more to flesh out here. Now, Don is probably going to take off at the 1:45 mark. He's got something to do. But Don,
no
I just want to, John, I want to get Don in here real quick because he's going to go.
Yeah,
right?
Billy.
So, react to all of that. And then we lead. A couple of times he mentioned the Council for National Policy, which is what no one will talk to me about. And I really didn't know too much about this. And again, you gave John all the credit. I have to give John the credit. John called me out on air for it. he came on my show and he's like, "Hey, do you know what the Council for Foreign Relations is?" I'm like, "Of course I do. Yeah, absolutely."
Yeah.
Like, "Do you know what the CNP is?" I'm like, "No, I don't." You know, and he set that up, and now I'm fine with it because I like John and we're cool. He's my friend, so we're cool. But he set me up on air to see if I knew what this was.
It's my litmus test.
Yeah.
It's my litmus test.
So and he's been hammering this in my head, and and I asked. I really value Don's opinion. Don is a ridiculously good researcher, really smart guy, and I wanted to know what this was about, and Don, give me your thoughts on this, man. What are you thinking here?
Well, when he talks about the Heritage Fund, it's certainly impressive litany of names and connections there, and you find these kind of connections everywhere. We do the same thing on the left with the same kind of things, but I think what the Heritage Foundation really is code word for is they were associated again with the birth of this neocon movement, which really happened in the 80s. And the Heritage Foundation, all these things have one thing in common, all these individuals you mentioned, and that is an unswerving devotion to Israel.
Wow. Incredible. Neil,
policy
go ahead.
has been transformed into something where everything we do, foreign policy-wise, for instance, Iran is absolutely no threat to the United States at all, but Israel and these groups have been pushing for war with them for a very long time. Syria, the same way. We have absolutely no interest in this. And when we went into Iraq, the entire Gulf War, all that was all about Israeli interests. The one that perhaps isn't is North Korea, but then you get into the central bank thing where all these countries just happen to be the only ones that aren't playing the Rothschild game, and they don't have a central bank. They just happen to be the only ones we're targeting. But so that's what I find fascinating about the Heritage Foundation. And again, it's because, and then you become a limited hangout type of thing. So you see the Ben Shapiro type of young people that are being pushed on air. They're always going to be, they're first of all, they're very anti-Islam, and we hear when you talked about the Sharia law and all that stuff. And I'm very cognizant of that we get, and what's really ironic is that I mentioned this to somebody on Facebook and they didn't seem to get it, but everything that they say about that is written in the Quran, and where they say that, Sharia law allows you to have sex with 3-year-olds and all that stuff, almost word for word. That's the same kind of thing I used to hear people who were trying to blame the Jews, who said this is what the Talmud says. The exact same thing. You can have sex with 3-year-olds. So is any of it true? But again, it's so much. Is anyone? I noticed you didn't mention Tucker Carlson there. I actually think he's the only decent one on Fox News. So hopefully he doesn't have these connections.
Oh no, I did mention Tucker Carlson. He
does.
So he gets paid. He gets paid by the Koch brothers to keep certain stories out of off his shows and to promote other ones. That was proven by Politico magazine.
Wow.
And Glenn Beck. Yeah, it's horrible. Sorry.
I like Tucker too. What are you gonna say? Anyway,
yeah, absolutely, yeah.
So real quick,
I have a theory about the Israel thing. This may be very, very out there, but by looking at the connections to, and I may be incorrect about this because, to say, like John's actually the expert on the CNP and the heritage. They're connected to the John Birch Foundation. Now, as far as my understanding goes, quite a lot of these people genuinely believe in the rapture. And that involves taking back the temple in Israel, and so.
Well, hold on. There's two different. Okay, so let me speak on this real quick, Neil.
Yeah. Okay.
So they are connected. The genesis of all this is the John Birch Society, which later morphed into Heritage and the CNP and Western Goals. But the thing is they've always had strange bedfellows. You have pro-Zionists. A lot of them being Jewish, on all these groups that seem to do what Don Jeffries is pushing, which is pushing for the state of Israel, pushing for neocon type wars for the state of Israel. But you also have these white nationalist Nazi connections too. Like they make strange bedfellows.
Yeah.
You'll see the Regnery family. You'll see the Liberty Lobby with Willis Carto. You'll see you'll see Laszlo Pastor, you'll see Jesse Helms, you'll see what was the bell curve, and what was the ethnic? There was some the eugenics and phrenology research that they were doing. There's a specific Pioneer Fund. So you'll see that. So it's weird that you'll see both sides, and it's weird that most people don't talk about both sides. If you're left leaning, you're going to talk about the Nazi element. If you're right leaning, you're going to talk about the pro-Zionist element. But they seem to make strange bedfellows. In the CNP, you have the Mercers warring with the Regneries, and you could say, well, is that true? Is it false? Is it really a war? Are they really just agreeing in the end? I don't know. But when you talk about the rebuilding of the Third Temple, you have, some Christians who will be pro-Zionist, who will be perfectly for, the Jews, like the Shabaluevich cult, rebuilding the Third Temple before Yeshua comes back. And then you'll have other Christians like myself that say, wait a minute, that's not supposed to happen in Revelation. What are you guys doing? That's, that's not Christianity. That's false CNP, push Christianity.
Oh no, absolutely. I wasn't trying to suggest for a second that was a widely held belief. I was wondering if, as you say, that element of the CNP felt that, or a certain element of them felt that they could facilitate that by seeming to be on Israel's side. I'm spitballing.
No, you're right. I mean, you have David Horowitz, who went on Alex Jones and InfoWars, major Council for National Policy member, convincing Alex Jones that the Mossad had nothing to do with 9/11. The United States and Anglo interests had nothing to do with 9/11. It was just the Saudi Arabian hijackers. Like Alex Jones's, part about 9/11 conspiracy is the conventional narrative now given to him by David Horowitz. So that's where we're at now. It's interesting when you guys mentioned Rush Limbaugh, CNP member as well, and David Limbaugh's brother. He's more of a conspiracy theorist now than actually Alex Jones is. He's talking about Q. He's talking about all these conspiracy theories where, even though I believe Q's just info, he's more of a conspiracy theorist now. And even Michael Savage is, who's CNP member, connections to Horowitz and Jay Sokolow. And so you see all these connections between them and the narratives that they push, and sometimes they go against it and sometimes they go for it. But like I said, the Zionists and the white nationalists make strange bedfellows when it comes to the Council for National Policy.
No, very much so.
Incredible.
Well, so much of this too is the reason you have so many strange bedfellows is because, and I wrote about this extensively in Hidden History, is because our intelligence agencies, our own government, has for decades has infiltrated all groups on the left and the right, extremist groups, so that you have and you're usually the most vocal and members that urge violence. Certainly in the Black Panthers on the left and the Ku Klux Klan on the right, you saw this over and over again. Timothy Leary was CIA. So was Gloria Steinem, and Gloria Steinem was admitted CIA. So and that's why for someone like me, especially when you guys are talking about all these connections, even someone like Tucker Carlson, if they all have these, is there anybody out there with a voice of public prominence that isn't connected to one of these? It's manipulated by someone.
No, it's just us. It's just us. If you make it big, that's it. You're done, Don. You're done. Yeah. None of these people. I mean, you even look at, you could say Pizzagate being pushed by Roger Stone. I do believe there's some truth to Pizzagate. Yeah. However, Tucker Carlson was in two food articles, review articles before the Pizzagate scandal. He was Comet Pizza Ping Pong's a very important guest. He would go there frequently with his family all the time.
Yeah. Isn't that something? Yeah.
All right, Don, are you sticking around or?
Well, I'll stick around for. Well, I want to hear. I can stick for 15 minutes out, but I want to hear about this group that I don't know. I have to confess I don't know very much about the CNP or whatever either. So I'd like to hear John enlighten me as well.
All right, Neil, I'm going to throw it to John, and then I'm going to have you react. You hear?
Yes, no, I think that's probably the best.
John, go ahead, man. Break it down.
All right, so, and I want to applaud all of Neil's work on the Atlas Network. Of course, Trump's pushing Judy Shelton to be Federal Reserve Chairman and her connections to Atlas and Heritage Foundation and Cambridge Analytica. And so the CNP was something, like Neil said, that I sent to him. That it was everything he was researching, but he had not come across that yet, which they try to keep it hidden as much as possible. So the Council for National Policy was founded in 1981 as an antithesis to the Council on Foreign Relations. It was kind of like a right version, more of a, some would argue, fascist, globalist or communist type, differentiation between the two, more of a theocratic relationship with the CNP as well. So the CNP had many founding members. It had Tim LaHaye, was head of the Moral Majority. He was also the author of the Left Behind series. The oil baron Nelson Bunker Hunt, who Don knows was, he was involved with putting up the Wanted for Treason posters with JFK assassination, which the John Birch Society was involved in. And also here recently, J.D. Tippit, Officer J.D. Tippit in the JFK files, it came out that he was head of the John Birch Society in Dallas, Texas.
No way.
During that time. So other members, of course, the millionaire T. Cullen Davis, who was implicated in 2 murders of his own family members. Paul Weyrich, who you mentioned earlier, and his connections to his connection to Laszlo Pastor and Nazism. And many people that have joined the CNP during the 1980s around that time were Phyllis Schlafly, Major General John K. Singlaub, who was part of Western Goals, who was part of the OSS and was a founding member of the Central Intelligence Agency. J. Peter Grace, the shipping magnate who was connected to Iran-Contra affair. Pat Robertson of the Christian Broadcasting Network. Edwin J. Fulner Jr. of the Heritage Foundation. Jerry Falwell. Trent Lott. Edwin Meese, who was for the Reagan administration, John Ashcroft, Oliver North, who actually spoke to the CNP and rallied them to donate to the Contras during the Iran-Contra affair to overthrow the Sandinistas in Nicaragua. And I've read that speech on my channel, YouTube channel. We've read the documents. You have the DeVos family, you have the Coors family, and of course the Coors family and their connections to Nazism, the Regnery family and their connections to being pro-Nazi in America First, and later to the National Policy Institute and Regnery Publishing, which publishes a lot of right books and a lot of conspiracy books. The Regneries are very much tied into with the modern white nationalist push through possibly the Red Ice Radio, maybe funding Adam Green, and the like. So those are people that are what they call old guard CNP members. Phyllis Schlafly. I'm probably missing a few. Is there any other ones that you can think of through your research, Neil, before we move on to more modern CNP?
I think you've covered pretty much everyone. You mentioned Edward Fulner and Jerry Falwell as well.
Yes, I did. They had a lot of connections with of this false Christianity.
Well, if I could just interrupt 1 second. This reminds me very much. This is kind of an alternative or a conservative version of the CFR.
Exactly.
With what Carl Oglesby wrote about in the Yankee and Cowboy War back in the 70s, and I think he was a member of the Students for Democratic Society. He was a socialist, but it was ostensibly about the JFK assassination. He was a JFK assassination researcher, but he postulated that there was a Yankee group, which is, I guess we'd think the CFR, and then a cowboy group, I guess, which would be the CNP types that were. Now, I don't know. I tend to think there's somebody above it all controlling all these people, but that's interesting though, because it reminded me of that when you mentioned the kind of the differences between them.
Very much so, Don. We have W. Cleon Skousen as well. Of course, the Skousen family being truthers, Joel Skousen and his brother Mark Skousen. Interesting enough, their connections to the CNP. W. Cleon Skousen was also in the John Birch Society as well. You had many generals, General Daniel O. Graham, Patton, not Patton from World War II, but his son that was in the either Korean or Vietnam War. I don't remember which one it was offhand. Robert Warren Stoddard, who was a millionaire, also funded the John Birch Society. These were old guard. My Senator Jesse Helms, and of course his connections to the Pioneer Fund and to Nazism from North Carolina. Jerry Falwell. I'm probably reset some names. Mary Crowley. These are all people that a lot of people might, know who these people are. They're really big in the conservative movement, really big in what I call false Christianity, and very pro-Israel in a lot of ways. These were the old guard of the CNP. Lawrence McDonald as well, part of the Western Goals. He was assassinated allegedly by the Soviet Union.
Edwin Meese and Donald Hodel, who were Reagan cabinet secretaries.
No, I did not. I did not mention him. And also, who was the Secretary of Education? Bill Bennett William Bennett.
Mm-hmm.
And the drug czar under George H.W. Bush and the Secretary of Education under Reagan. Also, Reagan spoke many times to the CNP during his actual presidency, too, as well. Yeah, I mean, he spoke to the CNP at least a total of 6 times, many times while he was president of the United States. The CNP definitely is very powerful. They have been in control. Some people like Jay Dyer will say, well, they're not in control now. I hate to tell you, but the Trump administration has many, many members who have spoken and were in the CNP, and we'll get to that. They control the right. And of course, above them, like the Bilderbergs above the CFR, you have even the more mysterious is something that I want Neil to look into, and I'm looking into, called La Cercle. They are the right's version of the Bilderberg, and they are above the CNP.
Now, here's the thing, right? Before you take off, Don, I want your comments on this, right? So,
yeah.
In the alternative movement, right, the truther movement, I hate that term, but let's use it so everybody knows what I'm talking about. We've been, storming Bilderberg for years, standing outside of Bilderberg and, covering it. Nobody else would cover it. And the Council on Foreign Relations, I get them both mixed up now since John's been hammering this on my head. But the Council on Foreign Relations, we all knew about this. This was common knowledge to the alternative community. We all knew that they were behind it. Now, this was all pushed by Alex. Right? I mean, Alex was at the forefront of making this public knowledge. As far as I remember it, I think I'm old enough to remember that.
Yes.
The Council on Foreign Relations is here in New York, and Rumsfeld and Dick Cheney and their involvement, in the 9/11 documents and all that other stuff, right? All came out. This is the devil. It was a complete, it just go over there. They funneled us in one way and didn't tell us about the other half. On purpose, because they were all connected in some sense. It's deceitful. We talk about a work, okay? We've been manipulated on so many different levels. Even when we think we're quote unquote woke, we've been manipulated even in that sense. In my opinion, that's the way it looks like to me. Neil, react to that. Am I off base?
No, I think you're absolutely right. And I hate to find myself sort of defending Alex Jones, but it is entirely plausible that you're absolutely correct that they are all connected, because he essentially got his start from the John Birch book, None Dare Call It Conspiracy. That was essentially where. So it's entirely plausible. I think that's very, 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 very possible that essentially that's the point, that either knowingly or unknowingly, they were leaning you towards one particular area, and I think I think it's very astute of you.
All right, Don, thoughts, and then let us know where we can find you and your books and all that other stuff.
Okay, yeah, and in my new book, Crimes and Cover-Ups: American Politics, 1776-1963, forward by Ron Paul. Very proud of it. Off to a good start. I talk a lot about the foundation, the Reese Commission that investigated foundations back in the 50s. Norman Dodd, the investigator, and it just this goes back a long time ago. Just to give you one example, the Carnegie Foundation for International Peace, prior to World War I. When they investigated the Reese Commission later, and the investigative foundation, they got their minutes, and they discovered that they were talking before World War I about how to get the United States involved in a huge war. During World War, this is the Carnegie Foundation for International Peace. Now, what is an organization that talking about war? During the war, they were talking about how to make the war drag on. So, I mean, all that's in my book, and it's kind of stuff that I think that and what differentiates people like Bernie Sanders today, who's trying to talk about wealth disparity a little bit, and people like Huey Long, who was assassinated for it, is that that's where a lot of this wealth is, or in these foundations. So it made me think of these foundations when you talked about some of these other organizations, because these organizations, whether it's the Clinton Foundation or the Rockefeller Foundation, the older ones like that, the Ford Foundation, again, the Carnegie Foundation for International Peace, these foundations have tremendous wealth there. Nobody really knows what they're doing. Nobody knows how much wealth is there. So I think these are important as well. And listening to you guys, I don't know. I get disillusioned a lot anyhow. I'm wondering, like I said, if there's any way to because I'm, we talked about Liberty Lobby a little bit there, and back in the day, I was a subscriber to the Spotlight, and I got a lot of information there that wasn't published anywhere else. And I'm now writing for the American Free Press, which is what the Spotlight became. So hopefully nobody's controlling me. I don't think. But
Don, I hate to tell you though, but Bill Cooper, who did not talk about the CNP,
Yeah.
however, he talked a lot about the Liberty Lobby and Willis Carto.
Yes.
And Cooper was, again, they have major connections to the Council for National Policy, major connections to these same people, Don.
And their, Liberty Lobby's attorney was Mark Lane. Was my mentor, biggest far left-wing critic of the Warren Report, wrote Rush to Judgment. Dick Gregory, he sat on the Liberty Lobby's board of directors. Peter Dale Scott, who you mentioned earlier, who I have some questions about. I communicate with sometimes on Facebook, but he was actually on there recently, and he's actually taken a task by a lot of people because he was actually kind of promoting the Russia nonsense, and which I was really surprised to see somebody who's invented the term, like you said, deep state or deep politics, do that. So, the more you investigate these people and look into these, there seem to be these kind of shadowy connections everywhere. And so it does leave somebody disillusioned and even more cynical than ever. And so I'm not sure what the solution is. I wrote an article, hopefully Lou Rockwell doesn't have any of these connections.
He does. I'm sorry.
Be quiet, John. That's it.
Oh.
Stop it.
What does he got? Is it CNP as well, or what?
Yep, they all have connections to the Council for National Policy. Look at Willis Carto. He founded the Liberty Lobby. His connections to, he was literally a Nazi. He was a National Socialist. And of course him, promoting David Dukes and also little Bobo Grits, the Mormon, that Bill Cooper used to rail against, him being an agent of the Mormon Church. They're all that's the thing is they're all. And we talk about Alex Jones later, and Mark Levin, and they're all tied into the CNP, and before that, the John Birch Society.
So you wonder is there anybody in public prominence that doesn't belong to the CFR or the CNP?
I think some of them don't even know.
Yeah, I think that's accurate.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
Well, I'm sure of that, and I'm certainly, and that's why I don't know if we can liken it to like the Masons. People who think the Freemasons are in charge. The people at the lower levels, they don't know anything until they get to the 32nd, 33rd degree or whatever. I don't know. Maybe it's based on something like that. But you guys have given me a lot to think about and more to write about.
Awesome.
If you go down this road, Don, you're going to make a lot of enemies.
Well, I'm thinking of a new article for the American Free Press, so maybe I'll suggest writing something on the CNP and see how they react.
They're not going to react to it good, my friend. but good luck.
That'd be awesome. Let's see, right? Let's see him put it out and see what happens.
Do it. And I wonder if they don't. That's true. But again, that may not be just because of that. Because I have because their audience is still basically supporting Trump, so I have to kind of dance around that. So I write a lot about the Russian collusion nonsense and things like that. But it's hard for me to really say I go on SGT Report a lot. I'm supposed to go on there tomorrow again, and. There a lot of them are still buying into the Q stuff, so I have to kind of dance around it. I don't want to alienate all them, but I'm certainly not going to. I have to kind of say what, especially after the speech he gave this week. I really don't see how anybody outside of real cult members are.
It's incredible. It's incredible that anybody still subscribes to this. Don, say goodbye to Neil. Say goodbye to John. Go ahead, bro.
Nice talking to both of you, Neil and John, and hope we talk again soon. Billy Ray is great. Thanks for having me on. Appreciate it.
Thanks for coming on. Appreciate your input, and we will be in touch, sir. So just go ahead and hang up so we'll wrap here.
Just to sort of go back to what you were saying,
come on.
Billy Ray, right? I'm absolutely positive that these sorts of things happen on both sides of the political spectrum, and it might seem like basically I get accused of being a lefty a lot of the time, and it's like. I'm not a lefty. I'm anti-corrupt government, and the mechanism that's being used against us at the minute is being framed in a right-wing term. We've got a right-wing government, and furthermore, and I think this calls back to what you were saying about how being told one thing for a long, long time doesn't necessarily mean that it was not true. But for a long time, everybody was down with this idea that it was unions that was going to sort of form this total control grid. There's going to be an African Union, an American Union, an Asian Union, a European Union, and people were basically saying, well, actually, there's similarities to what Hitler wanted to achieve with Europe to the construct of the European Union, etc., etc. And that built up, for example, the idea that was promoted by Brexit. A lot of the information, which turned out to be not true, actually, that it was a totalitarian state, that they controlled our laws, controlled our borders, controlled our sovereignty, and none of that is actually true. This turned out to be a lie. But now here's the thing: if I know about that, and you know about that, and everybody knows about that, who's listening about it, with greatest respect, the people who designed that system know that we know about it.
Yeah.
So my suspicion is that they changed tactics. Now, so what did they want to achieve? They wanted to achieve autonomy, or sort of like, a homogeneous, singular, controlled operation with one singular sort of central point. Well, that was going along, and people spotted it. It achieves the same thing. If you can get 20 leaders, right, in Italy, Germany, America, South America, Europe, India, Nigeria, Kenya, and all the other places that Cambridge Analytica have admitted to it, and you'll notice that they all run on this concept of being a popularist. Now, here's an interesting thing about all these popularist candidates. Not one of them actually mentions anything that's positive about their own countries. All they do is they basically talk about what's negative that might be invading. They never talk about as extolling the positive virtues of this country. They just talk about fear and jingoism. So it achieves the same thing. It's New World Order, for want of a better phrase, by piecemeal.
Yeah.
Rather than 5 unions, you've got 50 countries that all ascribe to exactly the same policies, exactly the same media is promoting these policies. They've got exactly the same talking points, exactly the same type of candidates, playing on exactly the same types of fears. And they all just so happen to match up perfectly with the policies promoted by the Heritage Foundation and further than that, the CNP.
Yeah, and you said piecemeal, and there's a lot of merit to that, right? It appears to me that they don't want anybody to deviate from this system, and I mean no one. They're trying to indoctrinate everybody into the specific way that they want you to think and the specific way that they want you to act. And they're really doing this with the technology nowadays, and I really don't want to go down that route because we will be here forever talking about that sort of stuff. But absolutely, I get what you're saying 100%. I do want to talk a little bit about the modern connections to the CNP before we take off.
Sure.
And maybe get into a little bit of this thing here. I want to get into Red Ice Radio, definitely. Tommy Robinson, and I know you mentioned him not too long ago, linked him to InfoWars. You can find him up there, but I think there's something to be said for the racial tensions and how they have been created.
Well, I mean, put very simply, Tommy Robinson is financed by Rebel Media, which is owned by Nina Rosenwald and Robert Mercer, and he's also financed by David Horowitz through the Shillman Fellowship. He's a Shillman Fellow, and his defence, because he's basically been... What he does is he picks up on cases that are already in the public eye and then pretends to have promoted them. He hasn't actually exposed a single crime. What he has done is made it appear that these crimes are overwhelmingly connected to Muslims.
Mm-hmm.
That doesn't mean that these particular crimes didn't go on. It means that after these people were caught, he jumped on it and started saying, see, they're all like this.
Agreed.
Which is obvious nonsense. The MEF, the Middle East Forum, which is American, pro-Israeli connected, the IDF think tank, basically finances his defence. He's a total grifter. Whilst all these people are financing his defence, he's also basically, asking for donations, which he basically spent on cocaine, according to whistleblowers within his operation. That's not me slandering him. That was reported recently. Yeah. It's just a total nonsense. And the thing that most people don't seem to get is that. Got a brain on them, like he was destroyed in a television debate by a rapper called A. Carla, who's an incredibly intelligent person, and it just falls to pieces. But again, this is part of it. It's part of this network, which goes back to that spidergram that I did, where basically Cambridge Analytica needed a network of media and media personalities to spread the message that tied in with the propaganda and the targeted, micro-targeted advertising that they were sending to you. And this was all about building this atmosphere of fear and building this atmosphere of feeling like you're out of control, that you're being invaded. And I think it's very interesting that basically Donald Trump continues to use that same language, the invasion language. I mean, apparently he used there were 2,000 separate ads that he put on Facebook that all used the word invasion. And I would suspect that was probably tied into the Cambridge Analytica campaign, because that's what they did. So
no, absolutely, and the lock her up chants are back now that he's running for 2020. He started his campaign. If you listen to the rallies, lock her up.
Yeah,
started
absolutely.
right again.
He's just never stopped campaigning because I don't really think he's got a lot of substance. Like, you know. I mean, again, you know, that was what that's what I forgot to say earlier to John. You were absolutely right. It was incremental. Like, you were told one thing. I was the same. One morning I woke up and read something about Trump, and I was like, that doesn't sound right. Hang on. And then you read something else. You went, well, that doesn't sound right. And then you find out that he's appointed a Saudi Arabian lobbyist and bought 8 businesses, which he had to sell on the sly because he realized that was illegal. And then he's doing this deal with Saudi Arabia. Then you look at the amount of Goldman Sachs members that he's put in his cabinet. And then you look at Steve Bannon and his dodgy connections to people like Mark Collins Rector and Brock Pierce. And Roger Stone. And then you look at Donald Trump, because then you start, well, actually, he was always a bit of a shifty character, connections potentially to the mafia, like, you know, not paying people, lying about his past, etc., etc. And it just all built up and built up and built up until personally I just went, oh yeah, no, it's a con, isn't it? But again, I wasn't impervious to it. I wasn't right from no, this is nonsense. I mean, I didn't trust any of them because I'm just a very misanthropic person anyway. But like, but I get it. I totally get it. The thing that's interesting is that basically I think that was the power of the campaign, because they attached it to the person, because they made it so personal, because they grouped you as the deplorables, because they basically, you know, they gave you that hope. You're part of making America great again. You know, it's a really powerful campaign. It's meaningless, but it's a really, really powerful campaign slogan. It's just weasel words.
It's emotional.
But that's why it's so hard for people to let that go, I think, and to realise that they were conned. And it's the same thing with Brexit and Nigel Farage telling you that you're going to get £350 million a week for the NHS, telling you that basically the EU destroyed or was behind the privatisation of British industry. It wasn't. It was the Heritage Foundation. Telling you that the EU destroyed the English fisheries. No, it was the British government. They sold all the plots of fishing to foreign investors. We're the only country in the EU that's allowed to do that, and we do that stabbing our own fishermen in the back. Also, basically, big business controls it. Like a quarter of the fisheries is owned by 3 people, and they just don't give the contracts to small people. That's what's squeezing the fishing industry, not being in the European Union. We were told that 80% of our laws were dictated by the EU. Do you know how many laws are actually dictated by the EU? 72 of over 29,000 laws that are in place in the UK today. And of those laws, all of them are things like the Work Time Directive, which means that you get a break after 6 hours, or you're not allowed to put things that cause cancer in jam. There's 72 laws, and not a single one of those is actually a law that I would repeal personally, and I'm sure anyone that is sensible would. But we were told a lie. Yeah. We were told that basically Turkey were going to join, and this was going to cost us much, much more. And that's not true. Turkey's never going to get in because we have a veto power. This is the point. You were told so many lies, and you were told them by people that A, should have been telling you the truth and had a responsibility to be telling you the truth, and B, in such a manner that it was sold to you on an emotional level, not a factual level, which is the prima facie tactic of successful advertising and marketing. You know, feels not reals. that was really what both of these campaigns were about. You know, we're going to do this. You're not. There was a point where basically there was a slogan that was essentially, "You're not believing in Brexit." It's like, oh yeah, because belief will get us through. You know, like they lied to us about the problems with the Good Friday Agreement and the Northern Ireland border. They lied to us about the freedom of movement. They lied to us about the option to have a Norway style deal. And again, they lied to us about the Lisbon Treaty, saying that, in 2020 it's going to come in and force us to join the euro. It isn't, I'm afraid. Like, the Lisbon Treaty came in 2009, and if you read the text of the Lisbon Treaty, it says the absolute opposite of that we can't join the euro unless we ask. And there's been a vote by the British Parliament, so the European Union can't force us to do anything. Now, again, it's a bit more nuanced than that. Is the European Union arrogant, bureaucratic, wasteful? Yes, it is. But what concerns me is that basically everything was a lie. All these benefits.
Yeah. The manipulation.
That's what gets to me, right? And it's horrible because basically it is manipulation on the most instinctual way, in a really, really clever way. And the only way that you can get around it is by basically saying, oh, yeah, I was tricked, which is horrible, which is really, really just like, it's easier to keep going.
Neil, it's horrible, but I want to go as far as to say that it's very easy, because all you have to do is admit it to yourself. And while that's very hard for some people, like, it's the easiest thing to do. Okay, you look at it. I think actually it's harder to lie about it because you're lying to yourself. So you're sitting there and continue to try to justify ways to justify your actions.
Well, to be fair, again, a lot of people don't know about the connections to Cambridge Analytica, and even if they do know about Cambridge Analytica, they don't know about the connections to the intelligence agencies, the British establishment, Marconi defence. All the board members are basically old Tories and like people who used to work with the Queen and stuff like that. Like, which means that even the concept of that vote being anti-establishment, even if you had very good reasons for it, that can't be true because the establishment was behind that campaign. Gotcha. And it's the same thing with Trump, and it's just as simple as that. And again, it's crushing, but logic dictates that the two positions can't exist side by side.
No, I got you, man. And, and most people don't know about Cambridge and all this other stuff, but at a very surface level, they can see that they've been lied to by Donald Trump just based on his actions and what he promised. And at that level, just admitting it to yourself, it should lead you down a certain different road. That's just my message to everyone out there listening. We don't have a lot of time left. I want to get out the modern connections to the CNP, and I do want to talk about Red Ice Radio. We'll leave Red Ice for last. John, give me the modern connections, and then we'll have Neil react to that. Come on.
Okay, so I did a video on my YouTube channel, We've Read the Documents, on Alex Jones, was he ever our guy? So we pull up InfoWars from May 1999. This is the farthest capture that we can get from the Internet Wayback Machine. So when we scroll down, what news agencies does Alex Jones say go get your news from? And I think that Neil is going to recognize a lot of these agencies. We have WorldNet Daily, Coach Joseph Faraya, a big member of the Council for National Policy. Drudge Report by Drudge, Radio Liberty, of course, its connections to the John Birch Society and the Council for National Policy. Newsmax, which was started by Christopher Reddy, as well as family members of the late Central Intelligence Agency Director William J. Casey, and also Richard Mellon Escafie, who Neil had mentioned earlier, and all their connections to all the think tanks that we had mentioned earlier. And then National Review, Jews for the Preservation of Firearm Ownership, the NRA. All of these have connections to the various think tanks that we mentioned earlier. So this is who Alex Jones is getting his news from. This is who Alex Jones is pushing his news as far back as May 1999. Now, of course, later, Jeffries would expose in the Secret Right Volume 2 that Alex Jones had footage for his in-game his in-game movie, that like the other part of it is in-game 2.0 or 1.5, actually had footage in there had not been published before that he had filmed, that he had sent Info Warriors there to film directly. It was him filming Phyllis Schlafly, the CNP dame herself, who also attended parties of Craig B. Spence during the Franklin scandal, the grandmother of America, possibly involving in some underage activities with children. She, Jones has this footage of her speaking to the CNP. How? How? So, there are other people that we know have been members of the Council for National Policy, Mark Levin, Rush Limbaugh, David Limbaugh, Michael Savage, and a lot of people that you see on the right. Tucker Carlson, of course, has connections to the CNP, but he's never come out on a list. In 1999, George W. Bush spoke to the Council for National Policy before he was elected president and made a promise that he would be a pro-life candidate so that they would put him up. Of course, you are aware of the Monica Lewinsky scandal was cooked up by the Council for National Policy and Council for National Policy member Ken Starr, who would later become Jeffrey Epstein's lawyer and also in connection to the Kirkland & Ellis law firm, who actually recently has spoken to CNP meetings the past couple of years. Ken Starr has. So there you go. So, we have modern CNP members, the DeVos family, of course, Eric Prince being involved with that, and Blackwater being
Larry
involved.
Pratt too, right?
Larry Pratt of Gun Owners of America. Yes, him as well.
Wayne LaPierre.
Wayne LaPierre
Yep.
too. Yeah. So you see, and so when we go to Trump, okay, so all the presidential candidates spoke to the CNP both before the election in 2008 and the election in 2016, including one Donald John Trump, who spoke to the CNP before he was elected president in 2016. So did Rand Paul. Of course, Billy, you asked Ron Paul. Ron Paul stated that he spoke to the CNP in the 1990s, and Ron Paul has connections to the CNP. We did not know previously that Ron Paul spoke to the Council for National Policy in the 1990s. You actually got him to admit that. So we have that for us. And Rand Paul's speech to the CNP, trying to stump for president, he literally gets down on his knees and fellatiates the CNP about how they're a great organization, they're fighting for us and all that, bull crap. So, Trump is a big part of the CNP just as much as Reagan is. And how we know is a lot of his administration members either were or are in the CNP or they've spoken the CNP. So Trump administration members that we know are in the CNP, according to leaked lists, are Steve Bannon, John Bolton, John Kenneth Blackwell was Election Integrity Committee, Steve Bannon was Chief Strategist, John Bolton was National Security Advisor, Kellyanne Conway, Counselor to the President, Marjorie Danis Felser, the chair of Donald Trump's Pro-Life Coalition, which I myself am pro-life, but it's still interesting of how they both push eugenics on one side of the CNP and pro-life on the other. Again, it's the whole confusion. Betsy DeVos, Secretary of Education. Of course, the DeVos family has donated and been long-term members of the CNP. Lawrence Kudlow, Director of National Economic Council. He spoke to the CNP in 2016. Paul Teller, who is assistant to Pence, as well as assistant now to Donald Trump. Sam Brownback, United States Ambassador at Large for International Religious Freedom, spoke to the CNP in February 2018. Benjamin Carson spoke to the CNP in 2015. He's HUD Director. Rudy Giuliani, Trump administration legal counsel, has been to many CNP meetings. Nikki Haley, Ambassador to the UN, spoke to the CNP in October 2018. Peter Navarro, Assistant to the President, Director of Office and Trade and Manufacturing Policy, spoke to the CNP in May 2019. Jeff Sessions, former United States Attorney General, spoke many times to the CNP. Mike Pence, Vice President of the United States, spoke to the CNP in May 2017. Scott Pruitt, United States Environmental Protection Administrator, spoke to the CNP in May 2017. Rick Perry, Trump's Secretary of Energy. He was also a CNP member too as well. Sonny Perdue, Secretary of Education, has spoken to the CNP too and has attended CNP meetings. I'm probably leaving a few people out, but yes, there are numerous connections to the Trump administration. I think Kristen Nielsen as well. She also has spoken to and attended CNP meetings too. So there are multiple people within Trump's cabinet, including his vice president, including himself, who have been to CNP meetings or are members of the CNP as financiers, like the Mercers. The Mercer families has financed the CNP and has been part of the CNP. So, all the fake truth movement or your right pundits all being involved in the CNP that I mentioned earlier, who are all pushing Trump, that you should vote for Trump, Michael Savage, Mark Levin, the Skousen family, Joel Skousen, Alex Jones, and all of these people are part of the modern day Council for National Policy.
There you have it.
And they are the ones I fell for it hook, line, and sinker. And through the work of Josh Reeves, through the work that you've done, Neil Sanders, through the work that I've done, through the work Matthew North has done, we do understand this network and this group of these right-powered think tanks and how they've controlled the truth movement since its inception in the early 60s with the John Birch Society, and how many people who thought, and I hate using the Matrix term, thought they took the red pill, but instead they took a blue pill dyed red. Yeah. And that's why I voted for Trump, because I believed in their horse crap and thought Alex Jones was our guy. But when you look into all these connections and who goes on each other's shows and what they're a part of, it's all part of this phony truth movement. And like you mentioned earlier, Neil Sanders, one last thing I want to say is, though Roger Stone has never been to a CNP meeting or known that he spoke to a CNP meeting, it's not known whether or not he has or not. He does have a lot of connections to Donald Trump, running a lot of psyops, as well as he possibly inherited the brownstone operation that Roy Cohn was running, because Roger Stone was very tight with Roy Cohn. So there's a lot of these players that surround himself with Trump that are a big part of the Council for National Policy, the John Birch Society. Alex Jones called Donald Trump the John Birch Society president, that he's the president of the Western Goals Foundation, that John K. Singlaub, who sings praises of Trump to this day, would be proud of him. And so there's no doubt that, whoever's at the top, we don't know. We know that there's different compartmental structures in these think tanks. The CNP is very powerful, just like the CFR is very powerful, just like the Bilderberg is very powerful, just like Lasser-Kell is very powerful. But the main difference between Lasser-Kell and the CNP compared to the CFR and the and Bilderberg is, we know when the Bilderberg and CFR meetings happen. We know who attends them. We can get membership lists. For example, Nikki Haley. Everybody's pushing Nikki Haley. Well, not Nikki Haley. I'm sorry. Tulsi Gabbard. Tulsi Gabbard's been a member of the Council on Foreign Relations up till now. They magically moved her name the past month or so from the CFR. So don't believe in the Tulsi Gabbard lie. She is not our girl. But so we know the people on these, but on the CNP, we only know their membership from leaked lists. Okay, that happen to be leaked from news reports and articles, and that's it. There's no published membership list. We don't know when their meetings happen. They do publish some speeches after the meetings. They do have a newsletter that gives us a little bit more information. But compared to the CFR, I can look up the members. I can see when the meetings are. I could go cover the meetings and stuff like that. The CNP cannot, and it was by design that way. Because once you look into the CNP, once you look into the John Birch Society, you'll figure out that the truth movement is false. It is a phony truth movement, and you've been sold a lie.
Well, they actually have a policy of not only denying membership, but also denying that the institution exists. Very much
Fight Club.
Yeah, basically. Like MI6 or the Mafia. It's like Gecko's CNP. It's... The other point, to tie back to what John was saying about the media, is that's how it works. Okay, it's about creating an echo chamber. Like, you can look at the sort of the cross pollination. I forget, it's in one of my blogs. There was a study done that basically showed the cross-pollination of all these supposed alt media figures and mixing with alt-right figures and supposed centrists on YouTube in the skeptosphere, which suddenly came out of nowhere and received...
The intellectual dark web, the phony intellectual dark web.
Yeah, quite. And basically that's the entire point, and why nobody knows about this, and why when people are confronted with it, it is so very, very painful for them, or basically they're so reluctant to believe it, because part of the mechanism is creating these echo chambers. And the point that really drew me into the Cambridge Analytica aspect of it is that basically I recognized it because that's J-Trig. That's a GCHQ program that was going on ages ago to create false gurus on the internet and to introduce false media stories and red herrings, essentially. There's things like SMISC, where basically the Pentagon's doing experiments to manipulate people's emotions online. If you remember, Facebook got caught doing this, and I think Petraeus had to apologize for it. They've admitted to sock puppet accounts and tapping into various social media nodes illegally and passing that on to either the DEA or ATF, which is completely unconstitutional, and somehow they managed to get away with it. And so it was that was the thing. To me, it was like, oh, this isn't new. But then you find out that basically, other than that, you've got very, very similar programs like i360, which is the Koch brothers data mining thing, which essentially does exactly the same thing. It sources data points from all over the place, collects them, puts them through algorithms, and basically characterizes you in certain categories in order to see what is basically going to be the most effective marketing campaign to be specifically pointed to you. Now, the aspect of this that a lot of people don't perhaps sort of realize initially is what this is all connected to is online manipulation is connected to the overwhelming isolation and overstimulation that basically everybody's got. We're addicted to social media. People are basically making themselves depressed physically because they're addicted to social media. You get a dopamine response when you put something on you get a positive reaction to something on social media. You get a bad response, an amygdala response, when people argue with you. So basically, you might essentially, just in the way that a gambler might learn their craft to basically get that better response, get that dopamine kick, you might start to censor your output or manipulate your output or go with things that you know are going to get a positive response. Sooner or later, you might realize that, oh my God, I've got 5,000 friends on Facebook. I've only got 5 friends in real life, which is actually pretty bloody good. But crikey, maybe if I acted more like my Facebook persona in real life, then perhaps I might be more popular in real life. Again, that won't work, but this is the subtle manipulation. Tie that in with it's tracking you. It's listening to you. It's seeing what you like. It's making recommendations. Netflix is making recommendations. This channel is making recommendations. Spotify is making recommendations. They're molding you. You think you're getting choice. What they're doing is they're learning about you. They're learning where you go, what you look like, what your habits are, who you talk to, when you talk to them, why you talk to them. And they're going to use that to manipulate them. If you want to get even freakier, do you know what Trapwire is? Trapwire is a facial recognition CCTV technology that is illegally installed. It's a pre-crime. It's a pre-crime determinator by which basically by monitoring people in public and getting access to this data sets via algorithms, they can predict when you're going to do a crime before they make a crime. And they've made arrests based on this in various cities in America. And it's tied to Palantir. Palantir is the data monitoring giant that's connected to Cambridge Analytica because they work with them in Africa. And it's run by Peter Thiel, who was the guy who, through In-Q-Tel, the CIA's venture capital arm, helped start Facebook. Sean Parker, also CIA hacker, helped start Facebook and Spotify and PayPal. No, that's Peter Thiel as well. But again, monitoring your purchases.
And Neil, want to interrupt you real quick, but with Peter Thiel, he funded the intellectual dark web.
Did he?
Through Eric Weinstein and the Weinstein brothers. Eric Weinstein is the manager for Thiel Capital, right. and he is one of the head members of the intellectual dark web. We're talking about Joe Rogan. We're talking about Jordan B. Peterson. We're talking about Ben Shapiro. We're talking about who was the leftist that went over. I can't think of
Benjamin.
Not Owen Benjamin. He's not part of it. The guy you mentioned him earlier. Oh, anyway, he'll come back to me later. But the intellectual dark web.
Rubin.
Yeah, Dave Rubin. The intellectual dark web is funded by Peter Thiel. Of course, Peter Thiel has connections to the Council for National Policy as well. He used when he was during college, he was speechwriter for Bill Bennett. And so, he seems to be the main funder and the main pusher of the intellectual dark web. Jesse Spots has done a lot of good research on this on YouTube. Jan Irving has, but then I got my own questions about Jan. And I've done research into this as well. But yes, they are the funders of the intellectual dark web. Peter Thiel is.
Well, that's incredible. That makes perfect sense. But that basically ties into what I was saying. What this is about it's not as straightforward as just like manipulating elections. It's connected to a complete and total control grid. They've got you in a petri dish. They know what you're doing. They know how you react to things. They know what you're thinking because they're making you think it. And do you see what I mean? And this is the even more dystopic angle of all of these things, because it is just connected to everything, and it's a terrifying network.
They did it to me, Neil. I mean, my friend brought me the information on the Council for National Policy during Trump's election. I said, "There's no way I would have known about that by now." We talk about Alex Jones is our guy, you know. But then when Trump started adding the swamp into his cabinet, my friend goes, "You really need to look at this. You really need to vet this." And then I looked at it and I said, "Oh my God, it all connects." Oh my God, I've been lied to this whole time.
They've done it to everyone on different levels. And what I want everybody to take from this, because I don't want you to think that the truth movement is completely fraudulent, because it is not.
No.
Right, we were steered in a particular direction, and we're it's like an illusionist. You look this way, but not over here. You know, that's exactly what happened to us. It's not like what we were doing was wrong. It was Patrick Wood that I heard not too long ago. He said, "It's never wrong to do the right thing. It is never wrong to do the right thing." So everybody continue doing what you're doing. Just be aware of the manipulation that is taking place, and hopefully we've provided a bit of a broader picture for you to look at and analyze, and hopefully we can start holding some of these people accountable. Go ahead, Neil.
Well, no, I think that's entirely it. Like, you're absolutely right. I mean, one of the things that sort of like also sort of ties into this is, I don't know if anyone's seen that great documentary Hacker Wars, but the Stratfor hack and Occupy Wall Street were basically both initiated by a hacker called Sabu, and from Lulzsec, Lulzsec was what it was called. And now what's really interesting about it is that he was the person that first sort of popularized the concept of Occupy Wall Street. And he's the person who suggested to Jeremy Hammond that they hack Stratfor. The other point is that Stratfor employees work for InfoWars now, and Stratfor happened to just start up in Austin, Texas in the very same month.
Neil, they would never be connected to one another. That with U.S. SOCOM and tip of the spear, United States Special Operations Command. No. JVS having a spear and SOCOM having a spear now as their logo. No, that would never happen.
But essentially, what transpired was that Sabu had been flipped by the FBI prior to suggesting both the Stratfor hack and Occupy Wall Street, which strongly suggests that the FBI were behind that. And again, that's an indication that this is the point. This is another aspect of what you guys are basically talking about, this manipulation of seemingly good causes. Nobody within that could be, except for Sabu, could be blamed really for their actions. I personally believe all the other actions were just. It's just that wasn't the point. There was a point to Occupy Wall Street, and it was very probably to just basically get people on lists or something, or to see. I wonder if it was a petri dish to see, it's an internet manipulation program, isn't it? Let's see if we can mechanize people all over the world with a tweet.
Yeah. Same thing is happening now. I mean, it just continues to happen. And on a larger scale, the division with race and the division with politics, and just this is all orchestrated. It's all manipulated, in my personal opinion. We'll get into red ice some other time. Go ahead, buddy.
John really is expert on this one, to be quite honest. As far as my understanding knows, is that all of a sudden they did what a lot of people did in the alternative media. They did going from being bipartisan to being heavily far right, to starting promoting pro-Hitler documentaries, white genocide theories, and stuff like that.
Completely flipped it. If you ever listened to Red Ice back in the day, it was a completely different show.
Can I talk about Red Ice for like 1 minute? Just like 1 minute.
Yeah, sure.
All right. So, they had Josh Reeves on. Heinrich had Josh Reeves. He knew about the CNP. Heinrich knew about the CNP. Josh Reeves was on twice talking about it. He's seen the documentaries. He knew about the Council for National Policy. Back in 2011, 2012, Heinrich Pomegranate did. So my theory, and of course there's other theories too as well. Of course, the thread on 8chan is now
Heinrich
gone.
being the host of Red Ice Radio. Go ahead.
Yes, yes. The thread on 8chan now being gone, it's lost into the ether of them exposing Red Ice. But okay, so what I've seen is the Regnery, their connections to the Heritage Foundation and the Council for National Policy, being white nationalists. They funded a lot of because William Regnery II, he started the National Policy Institute, of course, and he hired, Richard B. Spencer in 2011 to run it. So Richard B. Spencer still is a big part of the National Policy Institute. So my theory is that the Regnerys are going around and funding all of these white nationalist organizations or white nationalist leaning truthers like Red Ice Radio, the many different ones that you see out.
Definitely finance and various. So they were putting out books for Trump, and they were doing like telephone campaigns for Trump. So again, it's connected to this whole web essentially.
Yes. And also, Lana Lotef, who I think, was the one that seemed to be the agent that was put in to change Red Ice and to get almost a honeypot for Heinrich to fall for her. She worked for former CIA agent and music producer Miles Copeland after she left college. Many people have found Lana's CDs that she was doing, the music that she was doing. Later, she worked for a company called U.S. Allegiance Incorporated that was contracted by the U.S. Department of Defense. When Lana and Heinrich moved to the United States, they used a military personal travel company for their pets to transfer their cat Bayou. When they relocated from to Sweden, and then afterwards, it was the name of the company was Happy Tales Travel Incorporated. So there's also two New York Times articles that talks about Lana Lotef's relatives and the Lotef family being connected to assisting Russian immigrants to resettle within the United States too as well. So Lana has a lot of connections to intelligence. That was around the same time that the shifting of Red Ice happened to more of a white identitarianism. And because of that, I do think that the Regnerys are a part of this. The Regnerys are white nationalists, and they do push a lot of white nationalist rhetoric. And you'll see that a lot. And so they kind of, co-opted Red Ice Radio. They started putting more people out there like Richard Spencer.
Well, I mean, absolutely. I mean, that's what's so strange about this thing is I started just pulling on strings. I had no idea that the CNP even existed 6 months ago. Yeah. And I sort of stumbled eventually on the Heritage Foundation, kept coming up again and again and again. And then John very, very kindly got in touch with me and explained a bit more about the Heritage and a bit more about the CNP. And so I started pulling on that strings. It sounds like he's been pulling on from the other direction. But I think what it shows is that there is something to this because it lines up.
Yeah. No, it absolutely lines up. I mean, there's definitely something to it. I think, if anything, if we're going to take something out of this, right, is that there's something seriously up. Something is up. Too many connections to ignore. Plain and simple. So, I wanted to get this done for a while, and I wanted to bring in Don because I knew he was interested in the topics and he had a perspective to offer as well. So I thought it was fantastic. I was very happy with this in general. I think it laid out a lot for people to go back and research, and like I say all the time, do your own research, and figure stuff out. And if you find something that we didn't cover, or if you found something that we were wrong about, make sure you let us know. And we will be happy to, make the correction if it's necessary. Neil, welcome. Thank you. And tell everybody where they can find you. Come on.
Oh, thank you very much. Well, I'm on Facebook and I am on Twitter, but I don't tend to use Twitter. So, I apologize if I'm not responding to people on Twitter. But yeah, I'm on Facebook, or you can find me at neilsandersmindcontrol.com. What I've done is I've basically been writing this blog as I've been discovering what's been going on with Cambridge Analytica, probably for about, maybe a couple of years now. And if you go back to the start, I'm picking my way through it until finally, basically, the CNP comes into it about sort of chapter 12. But that's available to read for free on my website, or if people prefer to have it read to them, I've actually recorded it as like a pod. No, it's totally fair.
No, that's me, bro. You described me. Go ahead.
I've just I've recorded it as like a sort of audio file. So it's about 7 hours long. It's essentially like a book on tape. And you get the MP3 to keep, and if you want to share it or do whatever you want, or it's on there for free. And also there's my 2 mind control books, which are called Your Thoughts Are Not Your Own, volumes 1 and 2, which is basically looking at MK Ultra and various sort of social systems of mind control, advertising, music industry, film and television, that type of thing. And my book on Charles Manson, which is called Now Is the Only Thing That's Real, which is basically, it's a re-examination of the Manson case. I'm very, very proud of that particular book. I've actually sent it to members of Atwell, which is Charlie's charity, have said very, very kind things about it. These are people who actually knew Charlie, and they've read the book. And being in mind that I'm just, I don't live in America and don't know these things, I was very flattered by that. It essentially looks at the 4 or 5 different potential theories of what happened with Charles Manson, and then it puts it against a timeline and appraises which one is most likely. And I think people will be slightly surprised with what the end result is.
Incredible. Hey, listen, we'll have you back to talk about whatever you want to talk about, in particular, Manson.
Pleasure.
All of that stuff. It was definitely a pleasure. Eye-opening. Your research is serious, man. I appreciate it. And we all know John here. John is a resident alien here at the Infinite Fringe, so you're all good. But tell these people what's going on, man. Come on, Johnny.
Yeah, find me. We've read the documents on YouTube, and we've read on Twitter. I definitely want to thank you, Billy, and Neil as well. Neil, I'm a huge fan of your work. I've been following it, man, and the work that you've done on Manson and mind control and as well as going into the CNP and Cambridge Analytica and everything. I cannot applaud that enough.
Yeah,
people really need to look into Neil's work when they're researching the CNP and all these think tanks. And you're I'm glad that you're another brother in this fight. There's very few of us, Neil. Very few of us that are bringing this to light, brother. So I want to
as I said before, I wouldn't have known about it if it wasn't for you. And I'm also a huge fan of your work. So thank you very much. That's very kind of you. It means a lot to me.
Very cool, man. Very cool. It's the Infinite Fringe, ladies and gentlemen. Break out your pads and pens, like I said before. Go back and listen to it. Go check out both of these guys' work. It's phenomenal. Don Jeffries also. Go check his stuff. And we got, a barrage of shows over at theinfinitefringe.podbeam.com on iTunes that you can go find out about whatever you want. Not all of it is going to be to your liking, but that's not the point, right? So make sure you go check that out. Neil, hold on for a second, all right? We're going to take off. Take it easy now. Bye-bye.